Okay, good evening everyone and welcome to tonight's Planning and Development Control Committee. This meeting is being broadcast live on the Council's YouTube channel. My name is Councillor Rachel Layton and I will be chairing tonight's meeting. If I lose connection and can't chair the meeting at any point, then the Vice Chair, Councillor Matt Uberoy, will take over for me. I'd like to remind all participants of a few housekeeping points. Please keep your microphones muted unless you are speaking. When prompted, you may indicate that you wish to speak, but please wait until I call on you before speaking fully. I will also ask that members keep their questions and comments brief and to the point wherever possible. If any member councillor leaves the meeting or loses connection during an item, we will pause and wait for a few minutes for them to reconnect. If a councillor is not present for a substantial part of the discussion, they will not be able to vote on that item. The quorum for this meeting is 4 members of the committee. If we have fewer than 4 members in attendance, then I will have to adjourn the meeting. I'll now move on to item 1 on the agenda, which is apologies for absence. We have received no apologies for absence this evening, so I move on to item number 2, which is roll call and declaration of interest. So I'll now do a roll call to confirm the members in attendance. I will call on members in alphabetical order. When called on, please say present and note any declarations of interest. If you don't have any declarations, please just say present. So if I can begin with Councillor Ahern.
Present.
Councillor Harcourt.
Present, and I'd like to declare an interest in the Bishop's Park, the Rocks Lane paddle tennis application. I'm the cabinet member, and that particular area comes under my remit. I won't be taking part in the discussion or voting.
Thank you. Councillor Perez.
Present.
Councillor Sadiq.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Thorley.
Present.
Councillor Uberoy.
Present, Chair, with one declaration to make. I would like to disclose that I know one of the objectors, Vivian Heilbron, who is registered to speak in objection to item 7, Bishop's Park tennis courts. Vivian is a local resident in Fulham, as am I, and I've met her several times, although not in the last year or so. I confirm I've not discussed the application with her, and I do not believe my declaration will impact my impartiality this evening. I will therefore propose to remain with this item and vote, provided this is acceptable to the committee.
I think I would agree with everyone that that's acceptable, so we'll go ahead. So item 3, minutes of the meeting held on.
Excuse me, we haven't finished the declaration and keep members present.
You missed Alex.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Councillor Carmel. I'm not sure how I did that. Apologies. Please go ahead.
I am present, and I also have a declaration under item 7. It is a non-pecuniary interest. My daughter has in the past, but is not currently receiving tennis coaching at the Bishop's Park tennis courts, and also the school which my daughter attends makes use of the courts. I have no financial benefit from this, and I paid full price for the coaching. She no longer undertakes coaching at Bishop's Park, and I do not believe that this declaration precludes me from taking part in the debate and voting.
Thank you, Councillor, and apologies for missing you out there. I'm not sure how I could have forgotten about you there. Item 3 is minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of July. I'll now call on each member in turn to confirm the minutes of the previous meeting. If you agree the minutes, please say agreed. If not, please say not agreed and explain why you're not happy with those minutes or any corrections you'd like to make. So beginning with Councillor Ahern.
Agreed.
Councillor Harcourt.
Agreed.
Councillor Carmel. Councillor Carmel, you're on mute.
Sorry, I thought I pressed it. Agreed, however, I would like to highlight that I'm still awaiting a response from the Planning Department in respect of the question I raised at the to previous planning committee on the 2nd of June regarding Section 106 monies and repairs to the railings in Cambridge Grove.
Thank you. I think, could we ask that officers try and get back to Councillor Carmel about that, you know, at least before the next committee, which is on the 4th of August. Would that be
Sorry,
possible?
Chair, if I could just jump in. I'm Matt Butler, Head of Development Management. An email was sent to Councillor Carmel yesterday, giving a response on that query. So
I'm sorry, I must have missed that. I'll check my spam.
That's some good news. That's good news. Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Perez.
Agreed.
Councillor Sadiq.
Agreed.
Councillor Thorley.
Agreed.
Councillor Uberoy.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you very much. Committee members, in view of the number of registered speakers we have this evening, I'd like to propose an amended running order for tonight's agenda as follows. So that means we will begin with West London Magistrates Court, followed by Bishop's Park Tennis Court, followed by Westfield London Shopping Centre, and followed by 291 Wandsworth Bridge Road. I do now need to get each of your agreement on this. So if you can say agreed when I call your name. Councillor Ahern?
Agreed.
Councillor Harcourt?
Agreed, and I shall be switching off both my video and muting myself for the Rocks Lane application.
Thank you. Councillor Carmel?
Agreed.
Councillor Perez?
Agreed.
Councillor Sadiq?
Agreed.
Councillor Thorley?
Agreed.
Councillor Uberoy?
Agreed.
Wonderful, thank you very much. So that means we will proceed with item 4, West London Magistrates Court. If I can ask the presenting officer, Mr. Peter Wilson, to please introduce the report, and we'll just wait for a few moments while you have the opportunity to bring up your presentation.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. Can I just confirm it? You can see the presentation before you on the screen?
We can, yes. Thank you, Peter.
Yes.
Okay, so this item, as you can see, is the proposed redevelopment of West London Magistrates Court on Talgarth Road. And before going through the description of developments on the screen at the moment, just to draw your attention to the addendum that's been circulated with a number of corrections and additions. There's been one late objection received earlier this week, yesterday morning, that doesn't raise any additional material considerations as opposed to those listed out in the officer's report. Also, as set out in the report, there has been a large number of representations that have been made, including from the Hamilton Society, Margravine Gardens and St Dunstan's Residents Association, the Friends of Margravine Cemetery, the Hammersmith and Fulham Historic Buildings Group, the Fulham Society, and the local MP. These are set out and summarised within the officer's report, but in a very general summary of the concerns that have been raised. These relate to the height of the development, the traffic impacts and any local congestion, the overlooking privacy and outlook, heritage impacts, the design, noise, environmental concerns, the land use as a hotel rather than housing, and the current circumstances surrounding coronavirus. It's worth noting that the GLA, through the Mayor's Stage 1 response, is supportive of the proposal, including its height and proposed land use. TfL do not consider the proposal to have an adverse impact, and Historic England have also identified less than substantial harm to the male conservation area. The proposal itself is for 2 new class C1 hotels with a complete total of 842 bedrooms, including the usual ancillary facilities such as servicing, cycle parking, public realm and landscaping. There's no car parking provided except for 4 blue badge spaces to the front on Talgarth Road. Total area is just under 35,000 square metres, you see there. The hotels are provided with what is titled the North Hotel, which is a Part 23, Part 7-storey building which faces onto Talgarth Road. This features 442 beds and has its ancillary restaurants and bars, a rooftop viewing platform to the 21st floor, which also features a gym, meeting rooms, and servicing and cycle parking. And the Southern Hotel has 400 bedrooms and is a Part 10, Part 5-storey building, also with ancillary restaurants, plant, and servicing. Here is a general outline of the floor plan for proposal. So here we have North Hotel, and this image is also provided within the officer's report. In here, the height is the 23 stories here is located towards Talgarth Road, oversailing this parking access provision to a total height of 76 metres, before dropping down onto the east to a total of about 30.5 metres. The Southern Hotel features this 10-storey element onto the western boundary towards the arc, which is here, to a total height of 38 metres, before reducing again to 5 stories and just under 22 metres here to the southern boundary, the railway line for the Piccadilly line and the District line. Servicing is provided by a dedicated service road which runs the perimeter of the building. Through here to a servicing area. In this space, there's also pullover spaces for coaches and lorries to do that, planting around the perimeter onto the railway line. Public realm is provided through the site here. Structure, an open structure into the centre here, which is known as a tempietto in architectural terms. And access for vehicles on the westbound goes through the slip road off of the A4 and fly over and drop off area and then returning back. The site is within Hammersmith Town Centre and the Hammersmith Regeneration Area. It's in a site that's therefore located within a specified area within the council's tall buildings policy, as being an appropriate site for a tall building, and to deliver the regeneration area objectives as set out in the report in terms of job creation and mix of uses. Here we have images, an aerial shot effectively from the residential properties to the south of the Arc building, the South Hotel and the North Hotel, the A4. The Novotel is in the background here, the Broadway. And these are the properties of Yeldham Road. This is the same image demonstrating the nighttime impact and various lighting of the windows. This image is from Linacre Court, looking westward, the entrance to the hotel on the slip road, the flyover, and Novotel here on the right-hand side in the foreground, and the Arc just behind. And it's just a detail here of the architectural expression for that northern hotel. The applicant's architect has given consideration in terms of the impact of the windows and the dispersal of light to go through, deep reveals and the angles set out here. And then from the south, this is effectively a rear view from the rear elevation of the properties opposite on Yeldham Road, which backs straight on without garden areas onto the railway line. This is the 5-storey element here, South Hotel. And this is the service road that we can also see with the proposed green screen and planting that will shield that area. On the left is the dedicated service lift to go up onto the viewing gallery, gym space, which is located here and set back. These areas here onto the south are cores for the building, as are on the end. And hotel rooms are located on these windows here. This is a view looking south from the Arc here, is on the right from the A4. Here you can see transport coming in into the drop-off area and then back out again. This is the west wing of the South Hotel. And in the background, we can see Lambda here and the BP petrol station that is located immediately to the east. Here is the access to the service road to the west, which then exits here. This is inside into the new public realm, which will be free for public use and access. It's the taller element and South Hotel, and this is the Tempietto, as you can see, is open, which provides the various accesses for restaurants and the ancillary uses within the hotel's uses themselves. And this is the same space from the other direction, the 5-storey Southern Hotel here. So this is effectively the approach through the landscape public realm area from Talbot Road. The taller element is here on the left of the image. This is just a demonstration of some sections of the site. So this is a north-south section through the centre of the site. The properties of Yeldon Road here, the flyover, the Novotel opposite, and the arc in the background demonstrate the relationships of the heights and its settings. It's the service road before we see the cutting for the railway line. This also sets out the same image, but with some distances and heights as proposed. You see the arc itself here, the crow's nest tops out at 65 metres. The shoulder height of the tall 23-metre element is 70, before rising to 76 metres here. The distance window to window from the Southern Hotel to the rear of Yeldon Road is around 44 metres. 95 metres the rear windows of the tall element of the North Hotel. This section is from east to west, so this time the arc is on the left, cutting through the middle of the site with the Novotel in the background, looking north. The relationships here, 65 metres there of the arc. And this is the same one in a wider townscape view, again showing the heights and the relationships. So you can see here the arc is between 54 and 65 metres in relationship to the taller elements of the proposal. So here's some selected views of the main impacts that are considered. If I pass over to my colleague, Alan Jones, who's going to walk through these.
So, as Peter just mentioned, in support of the application, a townscape and visual impact assessment was submitted that includes 36 views in total. This is detailed in the committee report that members had before them to consider. So, what we've done, rather than going through all those views, is considered a number of the selected views, which are subject to a lot of the objections and concerns that are raised within the application correspondence. So, we just gone to the first view. First of all, I'll just talk through these. Okay, so the first view is the view from the riverside on the south bank of the Thames. And what you can see in this view is the Mall conservation area in the centre of the shot here, which includes in the forecourt a number of listed buildings, and as I mentioned, the designated area of the conservation area as well. Just to the right, just popping up beyond those beyond those section of buildings, is the Charing Cross Hospital building, and then in the centre of that group is the crow's nest of the Arc, which again pops up in terms of the background view within that setting. As we go further into Hammersmith, we then see the Novotel and Hammersmith Broadway developments, and then also the existing Landmark House development. And then to the left-hand side of the view, we then see the Sovereign Court development moving in that direction. So we just go forward now, Peter, onto the view with the proposal scheme. So the blue line wireframe shows the extent of how that view would change with the proposal that comes forward. And then if we just go forward once more. Great. So this then shows with the two black lines that are established, the impact cumulatively with the replacement landmark house development and Sovereign Court completed within that viewpoint. So I think just a point for members to be clear about here is to actually make reference to the fact that this is a background view within this setting, and that the view in part is screened by the crow's nest of the Arc and its upper levels in this setting. So if we just go on to the next view now, Peter. So this is a view from Margaret Green Cemetery. So this is it within the kind of the main core of the historic asset of the cemetery, where there are a number of tombs, as you can see, and memorials in this setting. Now, again, in terms of the existing context, the foreground context is actually the existing terrace properties. And again, you can see that the Arc and the crow's nest actually appear above that within that setting as well. So we just go forward onto the next image. So this is now the proposal within situ as proposed. And as you can see here, that the main part of the form of the building that would sit above the existing context is the North Hotel tall building at 23 stories. If we can just go on to the next one, Peter. So this is now a view taken from the western extent of the cemetery. And again, this is a view that shows the existing context. So quite helpful that the TVIA was undertaken when the trees were not in season. So you can actually see without a kind of the leaf canopy what the background view is of the cemetery within this setting. And again, if I just talk you through what's in the background here, so in the background of the main tree that you can see in the forefront of the view, that's actually Lambda just sitting behind it. And then just left of that, you can see the Novotel development and then other developments within the town centre. So we just go forward to show where the proposal scheme will fit within that setting. So as you can see on this view, in the centre of the view, you can see that the tower of the proposal scheme would sit behind this view, just adjacent to the Novotel building. If we go on to the next one, Peter. Okay, so the next view that we've got to consider is from Biscay Road. So this again is a view that has within its context the existing terraces within the foreground, and again within the background view, the Arc and the crow's nest are quite clearly visible in this setting. It is worthwhile saying that this part of the townscape analysis isn't within the conservation area setting overall in Barron's Court, and we'll come on to that in a second. But if we just go on to the next view. Okay, so within this setting, what we can see is the south tower kind of hugging in with the Arc, creating a kind of a core cluster here of buildings within the setting of the Arc. And then within the area to the east beyond that, again, the main tower element of the Northern Hotel and the 23-storey maximum height of that building sitting within this setting, again, within the background view. If we can just go on to the next one. So as I mentioned, so this is a view from the main core of the conservation area within Barron's Court. So this is a view from Margravine Gardens looking westbound. And again, just to give members just some understanding of this view. So to the left of this view, you have some of the existing buildings within the conservation area. To the right of the view, you have the wall that actually then provides a screen into the underground line. And beyond that, you then have Lambda Lineker House within the right section of this view, and then to the left-hand section, Lambda here, and then beyond that, the existing development of the Arc. So we can just go on to the next one, Peter. So as you can see in this view, the main element that's visible within the view is the tallest building of the hotel development. the 23-storey tower. Now, again, within this view, what's quite important to note is the fact that the development doesn't sit higher than Lineker Court, and also starts to coalesce and form a cluster with the existing buildings on the other part of the island site as we see it, and then with Lambda in the foreground beyond. So we've just gone to the next one. So this is a view from St Dundas Road. So this is one of the two key viewpoints where you'll see the development from within St Dundas Road, where it isn't screened by the existing terrace properties within these views. So what you can see here is this is the view of St Dundas Road, where the junction with Beryl Road as well. Now what you can see in the kind of left-hand side of this view is the existing terraces of St Dundas Road, and then the terraces of Biscay Road sitting behind those. Within the background view again, the Arc and the Crow's Nest sitting in a background view to that as well. If we go into the centre of the image, what we have here is the locally listed William Morris School in the current setting, and then as Peter's just put on the screen, the tall building element of the scheme would then sit within the background view of that. Now again, as referenced in the report, just to make members aware, the relationship there, if you can see, there is a similar relationship between the Arc and the existing terraces and William Morris School and the tall building within this setting. We just go on to the next one, Peter. So this is a view towards the eastern extent of St Dundas Road. So this is basically where St Dundas Road, so I'm just trying to get the detail is. So St Dundas Road, you can see in the left-hand portion of the image, and then the right-hand portion of the image, this is where St Dundas Road turns into Margravine Gardens towards the east. Now, as you can see in this setting, the view is again of the tower within that scope between the two blocks of the site. Okay, and if we can just go forward to the next one, Peter. So this is the next view where the site is again quite prominent. So this is again St Dundas Road at the intersection with Margravine Gardens. Now again, just to be clear, this is within the heart of Barons Court Conservation Area, and as you can see within the foreground, the terraces are quite prominent within that setting. Within the background views, you've again got the Arc, the Crow's Nest, and then also Novotel, which are quite prominent within that setting. So we just go forward to the proposed. So again, the southern tower is quite prominent in this setting now as proposed, and again starts to form a cluster with the Arc to the western extent of the site. Towards the eastern portion of the site, the tall building again has its own reference within those background views as well. Okay, thanks, Peter.
Thank you. Thanks, Adam. And so just as we close the presentation, just an overview of the heads of terms that have been agreed to mitigate the impacts of development. They're on the screen there, contributions towards infrastructure, climate change, crucially in relation to objections and concerns raised by residents about traffic and congestion, and any possible rat running to those residential streets that we've just had a walk through on the views. Officers and council have negotiated with the applicant a contribution set out there towards a low traffic neighbourhood, which will introduce enforcement measures towards preventing non-local residents and businesses from using those streets. There's also a contribution towards economy and jobs and local procurement. There is the usual provision of travel plans for the operational use, travel plan towards the construction period, which is reviewed annually and restricts and seeks to control the travel options of construction workers, and also a Highways 278 agreement for any works onto Talgarth Road. So in conclusion, officers have set out in the report the reasons for the recommendation that planning permission is granted this evening by members of the committee. The proposal is considered to accord with the development plan that is adopted at local, regional level, and is also in light of any other material considerations. The scheme is considered to be a high quality development, and the principle of the redeveloped site is, as say, in accordance with the development plan when read as a whole. There are significant design, heritage and public benefits that are considered to outweigh the harm to any heritage assets that have been set out and assessed within the report, and taking into account all the representations and material considerations. It's therefore recommended that planning permission is granted. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wilson. If I can now welcome two residents to tonight's meeting who are speaking in objection to this application. So that's Abel Haddon and Ruth Savory, apologies. Welcome to tonight's meeting and thank you for coming along. I understand that you've chosen to split your time between you so that Mr. Haddon, you'll be speaking for 4 minutes, and Ruth, you'll be speaking for 1 minute in objection. I'll be keeping time and I'll let you know when your time is up. Mr. Haddon, if you're able to unmute yourself and whenever you're ready.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
We can, thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Abel Haddon and I chair the 200-strong Residents Association, which represents those living in Margravine Gardens and St Dunstan's Road, immediately to the south of the proposed development and within the conservation area. Residents from our street accounted for well over half the 147 letters of objection submitted. Although we have other issues, we would like to address our single biggest objection to this proposed development, the height of the main hotel block, the tower, quite prominent, as we've heard the officer say, which at 23 stories we find quite appalling. At 3 meetings with the leader of the council and the developers, we made our objections crystal clear, namely that the height of the tallest building is a visual intrusion into a conservation area, invades the residential houses it looms over, includes a viewing gallery, which we feel only adds insult to injury, and deprives a number of houses and flats of evening summer sun when it loses the last hours of the day. To say that the views of third parties helped shape this scheme is simply not true. We have been told that the economics of having paid 43 million for the site means the developers need 842 bedrooms across 45 stories. However, we have consistently asked the developers, their architects and the council why their configuration of those 4 blocks we've seen, which are 23, 10, 7, 5, couldn't be reconfigured to say 16, 14, 10, 5, to reduce the height and overlooking and privacy impacts on our community. And we have never received any form of reply, which remains a mystery to us. We could see no justification for a main building of 23 stories, unless the developers believe that becoming the tallest building in Hammersmith town centre is a prerequisite to gaining the council's recommendation for approval. We note that Landsec, owners of Novotel, and their operating partner, Accor Interest, have also objected to the proposed development on the basis that there is insufficient need for a hotel of this size and scale in this location, and that the proposal before you will result in an over-concentration of hotel accommodation in the immediate area. Planning permission was granted in August 2017 for the redevelopment of Landmark House, 400 metres away, which will deliver 400 hotel bedrooms. There is also pending planning application for the redevelopment of 3 Shortlands, 160 metres, which could deliver another 240. These schemes, alongside the proposed development, will deliver 1482 additional hotel bedrooms, which equates to over 100% of the council's own estimated hotel demand for the next 20 years. That's until 2041. Officers have acknowledged varying degrees of impact on our homes in this report, but they've given short shrift to them all and decided, on balance, a phrase used over and over, that none of the individual points in themselves warrant refusal of planning. What this report totally fails to take into account is the cumulative effect of all of these concerns on our homes and neighbourhood. To us, it feels as though the council is sacrificing the interests of residents for the vanity of a developer's skyscraper. Councillors, for all these reasons, we beg you to refuse planning permission until the developers and the council find a way to reconfigure the height of their skyscraper block, perhaps down to 16 stories as opposed to 23, with the other blocks being 14, 10, 5, to protect the impact on the homes of local residents, some of whom have lived here quietly for the last 40 years. Thank you very much for hearing me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Haddon. If I can now invite Ms. Ruth Savoury to speak to committee.
Good evening, can you hear me?
We can, please go ahead.
I'm Ruth Savoury, Secretary to the Friends of Margravine Cemetery, a big and expanding paid up membership of over 180 members and from a wide local community. Traffic-wise, it is the streets surrounding the cemetery which will clearly bear the brunt of the substantial increase in traffic from the north, south and west, as indicated page 95, table 6.2 of the report. The design is now much improved and we're grateful for that. Yet, 800 plus beds has to be challenged, as the one thing we have consistently asked for, should this development go ahead, our main and urgent request in planning terms is to keep a sense of proportion in our conservation area. Walking up the main drive of the cemetery, we want to preserve the precious skyline. It is not to see a building of this height, setting a precedent, a very tall building out of all proportion, yet the one thing that's remained in the plans from the onset. It would be an irreversible loss for our skyline. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Savoury. I'm now going to move on to those speaking in support of the application, but just to say I haven't forgotten that we also have Councillor PJ Murphy and Andrew Slaughter MP speaking in objection after that as well. So if I can invite Mr. J. Wulalia, and apologies for any mispronunciation there. Can I invite you to address committee alongside Mr. Ward, and you have 5 minutes in which to address committee, and I'll let you know when your time is running out. Is Mr. Ward or Mr. Awuwalia there? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think you're muted.
No, I'm not sure I am. Can you hear me now?
No, sorry, not you, Chair. I think Jay's muted.
Apologies. Mr. Ward or Mr. Awuwalia, are you able to unmute yourself so you can address committee?
Yeah, good evening, Chair. It's Richard Ward here. I think Jay is muted.
Jay, are you able to unmute yourself so you can address committee, or would you like to let Mr. Ward speak first? Mr. Ward, do you have any remarks that you'd like to make to committee? Okay, please go ahead.
Thank you. The Hammersmith Magistrate Court was deemed surplus to requirements in 2016 when it was confirmed that the existing services could be consolidated into other existing court facilities nearby. The current building does not optimise the site's development potential and will be difficult to convert, due predominantly to its deep floor plates. We welcome the conclusion in the officer report that our proposed scheme is compliant with the statutory development plan.
Can you hear me?
Our site forms a key part of the Hammersmith regeneration area. one of 4 regeneration areas in the borough where major regeneration and growth is to be supported by the council over the next 15-year period. The Hammersmith regeneration area alone is required to deliver 10,000 new jobs by the year 2035. The adopted local plan identifies Hammersmith Town Centre as an area where tall buildings may be appropriate. We welcome the assessment in the officer report that a tall building on this particular site is compliant with policy. A key local plan policy aim is to inject life and vibrancy into central Hammersmith, attracting more people to the area and making it a more desirable place to work and visit. Proposed in the area are expected to secure economic benefits for the wider community by providing programmes to enable local people to access new job opportunities through training, local apprenticeships or targeted recruitment. We have already held very positive discussions with West London College and the Hammersmith Business Improvement District and other potential partners to explore how we can create significant local opportunities for jobs and the use of the proposed facilities on site. We're also committed to improving the public realm available in Hammersmith, encouraging new activity, arts and cultural offers in the area. We will continue to work with the Council and TfL to create a new landscape public space, as well as greatly improving the existing pedestrian route to and from Hammersmith Town Centre. We talked to a significant number of stakeholder groups during what has been an extremely comprehensive consultation process. We welcome the findings of the Council's independent design review panel, who have confirmed their support for the scheme, considering the proposed massing and layout to be both elegant and refined. The Greater London Authority have also confirmed their support for the proposed height and massing, advising that they do not anticipate the scheme will cause any harm to any surrounding heritage assets when taking into account the tests outlined in the National Planning Policy Framework. Our scheme has been designed to minimise any impact on nearby residents, with our tallest building located in the northern part of the site, almost 100 metres away from the nearest residential properties. A full travel plan, a servicing management plan, and a significant contribution towards the implementation of a low traffic neighbourhood scheme will be secured through the Section 106 agreement in order to minimise any highways related impacts. The proposed scheme incorporates a wide range of benefits, both for the immediate local resident community, but also for the borough as a whole. These benefits include a £5.4 million contribution towards social, physical, economic and transport improvements in Hammersmith, a £1 million climate change contribution, a £500,000 contribution towards a low traffic neighbourhood scheme, associated hotel facilities including restaurants, a gym and meeting rooms, which will be accessible to both hotel guests and the local community, new landscape public open space measuring 11,000 square feet, a publicly accessible roof terrace, creation of 400 jobs during the construction phase, plus 25 apprenticeships and 64 work placements, creation of 300 permanent new jobs in the new development, sustainable and energy efficient buildings which reduce carbon emissions by 37% when compared to the 2013 building regulations and will achieve a BREEAM Excellent rating. Our client and the professional team, led by multi-award winning architects Roger Stirk Harbour and Partners, are extremely proud of our proposed scheme, and we hope that in line with the recommendation of your officers, members will be minded to approve our application this evening. Thank you.
Chair, if you can hear me, may I address the committee now?
You can, please go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening, my name is Jay Alawalia and I'm the director of the applicant Dominus Group. I would like to thank the chair and the committee for giving us the opportunity to speak tonight, and we welcome the officer recommendation to grant planning permission for our proposed scheme. Dominus Group is a family-run property business with a focus on hotel development and operation. We typically retain ownership of our hotels, managing them on a day-to-day basis, employing our teams, and in doing so, creating key employment opportunities for local people. We recognise the importance and value of working with the local community, not just through the pre-application process, but also throughout construction and operation of all of our hotels. For example, we recently converted a Grade 2 listed courthouse and police station in Southwark into our newest hotel, the Dixon. Our neighbours are now some of our most regular visitors, with local groups enjoying discounted pricing and free meetings in the old courtroom. We intend to replicate this approach in Hammersmith and Fulham. On the site under consideration this evening, Dominus Group has worked collaboratively for more than 2 years with the council, the local community and statutory consultees. Our previous application submitted in January 2019 had recommendation for approval by planning officers. Despite this, we chose to pause that application and embark on a new consultation. Over the past 9 months, we have regularly met with the Hammersmith Society, Margravine Gardens Residents Association, and Friends of Margravine Cemetery, and have been proactive in listening to feedback and amending our proposals accordingly. We hope this new proposal, designed by the world-renowned Roger Sturt Harbour, is viewed in the collaborative light in which it was submitted, and that members are able to grant planning permission this evening. Were this application to be unsuccessful, it would be our intention that the previous undetermined application, which retains officer's recommendation for approval, would be considered at the next available planning committee. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you very much for your time. And if you can just pop yourself on mute now for me. Wonderful. Okay, if I can now invite Councillor PJ Murphy to address committee. And Councillor, as I'm sure you remember, you have unlimited time in which to address committee. But if you're able to keep your comments brief, that would be helpful.
Okay, thank you very much, and I'll try and be as brief as I possibly can. First of all, I'd like to say thanks to the developers for the changes they've made from their original design. With a thinner hotel, it certainly looks somewhat better than it was. But I think if we go back to the very start of the presentation, the officer's presentation, when we actually saw the impact of the streets around this hotel, some of whom are in my ward and some are adjacent to that ward, you'll see that it is a significantly large building, and it does have a significant impact. Now, planners might call these small, or they might call them marginal, but to people that live in that area, they are neither small nor marginal, but they are substantial. On some of those pictures there, you just saw that there would just be a block that would just hit people in the face as they walked along those particular roads. And the essence, the point I'm making there is this hotel is just too large for the area that it's in. And I don't understand why it couldn't have been lower, but with more blocks. And I suppose an indication of that is the desire to have a roof terrace overlooking Hammersmith. And you have to ask yourself the question, why? Why do you want to provide a facility for people to be able to look over and into my residents' gardens or their residents' houses, albeit 100 metres away? It's still an infringement on people's livelihoods for that to be happening. If I just turn to the traffic generation that this hotel is going to have, the new hotel will have, it says, and these are figures from the hotel and haven't been independently verified, an extra 5,640 journeys per day. Most of those, they believe, will be on foot or via the tube, but there will be 714 taxi trips per day. And that, of course, excludes coaches or staff being dropped off and that sort of stuff, which is a significant impact on the local area and a significant impact on our local residents. So just the scale of the hotel and the amount of traffic that's going to be generating must say that this is something that can't or shouldn't be considered. If we look at paragraph 5.4.14 on page 89, on some of the properties, it has a shadow from 1,300 to 1,600 on the community gardens, i.e. in winter, there is no light there. They are dark from 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And it says later on paragraph 5.418 that would be from 9:30 in the morning till about noon is the only light around that area during the day. Now, that might be terrific for moles, but it ain't terrific for my residents or people that want to use the gardens. To restrict people's use of or ability to have sunlight in that area for that length of time during the winter days is, to me, unacceptable. There's a part also here on coaches. If I look at the request for coaches, under the London plan, there should be 1 coach space per 50 bedrooms. We have an 840 bed hotel, but only 2 coach parking spaces. Now, my residents around the Novotel are constantly complaining to me about the number of coaches that are pulling up and waiting to go into the Novotel. And I fear that with only 2 coach parking spaces, the streets around this particular hotel that's being proposed will be adversely affected. I think my final points are to do with the construction time. I'd like to remind the committee that Marshall Gardens and Dunstan Road, well, Dunstan Road is the entrance road to the local A&E. And today, just cycling down, I forget which road it was now, just cycling down past the hospital, I saw an accident with a motorcyclist and a bus. The motorcyclist had severe bleeding coming from his head, and the ambulance thankfully could get there very quickly. Unless traffic is blocked from using Dunstan Road during a construction phase, it would be very easy to see lorries getting stuck there with construction material on it, which would then impact the A&E and getting out to people. So if this is accepted, then I would ask that no construction traffic should go down Margarine Gardens or Dunstan Road. Those should be clear, and it should be clear for my residents. I'd also ask that the, so I'm just going to switch off my video now to go on to my emails. I put in an email request earlier that there were 2 other pieces I'd like to look at, please. In condition 38 on page 37, it has the hours of use for outside seating in the roof terrace from 6:30 to 11 o'clock at night. That's been changed from the previous 8 o'clock in the morning. I don't think people want to be up on the roof terrace at 6:30 in the morning, but nevertheless, it shouldn't be open until 8 o'clock. So I prefer that, please, if that was reverted to the way that it was before, an 8 o'clock opening. In condition 3, the community liaison group is a very positive idea, but the drafting of condition 3 on page 14 is merely about information. And informative has been added to page 37 of the report, but that informative really should be part of condition 3. And so if that could be done, that would be appreciated, please. Okay. So just really to sum up, the real impact here is around a significant increase in traffic, the height of the overall building and the impact of the building, the visitors gallery, and the overall visual impact of a building like this overlooking conservation zone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor, and thank you for coming along to tonight's meeting. If I can ask Mr. Andrew Slaughter, MP, to address the committee, Andy, whenever you're ready. You also have unlimited time.
Thank you, Chair. I'm grateful. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Thank you very much, and I'm very grateful for the committee for letting me speak and express my concerns about the development. Can I just first of all briefly deal with the point the developers representative made about this being a surplus site, surplus to requirements? This, of course, has been, it's the head of Hammersmith Magistrates Court, and then indeed the combined court centre for Hammersmith, purpose-built building from the 1990s. There have been some almost 300 courts closed around the country in the past 10 years, and I'm sure many of my colleagues would say that they also weren't surplus to requirements, but they did go through impact assessments and closure programmes. Hammersmith Court was different. That and Camberwell Magistrates Court were closed as part of a revenue generating exercise. It's right, and the Minister of Justice would say, that they reallocated the cases. In fact, those needing county court services will now travel over an hour to East London. Those requiring magistrates court services, some will travel over an hour to Hendon in North London. The purpose of the closure was to generate a capital receipt, and the effectiveness of that, from the Minister's point of view, is that was a capital receipt from this developer of £43 million, which is around 20% of the entire income from the sale of those almost 300 courts around the country. So 1 out of almost 300 generating 20% of the revenue. And the reason I mention that is that having paid a premium for the site, I think Mr. Haddon indicated, it really behoves this developer, if they're to make the matter profitable, to develop this relatively small site to its absolute maximum. And I think that is what lies behind what many residents think is an overdevelopment of the site. And I would say Also, I would add that unusually, the Ministry of Justice had a planning brief for the site, which envisaged a single building for housing purposes on the site. Now, that didn't stop this developer buying the site and putting in their own application. But it's interesting that this is the publicly owned land, and there would therefore have been 50% affordable housing on the site had it been developed for housing. And therefore, I look somewhat askance at the £5.5 million of community benefit. I know there are some other sums as well, but the main sum there. There will be some employment. There will be employment. Some of that employment will be local. I cannot see what other strong benefits there are to the local community here compared with either the previous use or the designated or the planned use, if I put it that way, as a housing site. And that's, if you like, where concerns arise from. There's a slight irony in the sense of my previous meetings this afternoon was of the Justice Select Committee, where we discussed in detail how the Ministry of Justice is going around the country now because of the huge backlog of work post-COVID, looking for closed court sites to reopen. And this building that sadly has stood, purpose-built building, for 2 years, where it's still in their ownership, will no doubt be open again and thriving as a court. But we are where we are on that. As regards the nature of the current development, I echo what Mr. Haddon said in saying that this is having read the report fully, this is a very covenanted decision, if I can put it that way, by officers. I was struck by the phrase, on balance, the impact of the proposed development upon adjoining occupiers is not considered unacceptable. That's about the most lukewarm recommendation I can envisage for the site, i.e. the officers are saying it just gets across the line. I don't think it does get across the line. What this is, and I think that the views that we saw earlier, as Councillor Murphy said, show that this is a very substantial commercial development on a small site close to low-rise residential areas, and it dominates and overshadows several streets of Victorian houses as well as Margravine Cemetery. And we saw the very pronounced effect it has on some of those streets and on the cemetery itself. Now, it's possible to take a view that a single tall building or a cluster of tall buildings is something that becomes a feature of the landscape, even if it is out of character to the rest of the area. That's almost a matter of opinion or taste, but I don't think it can be denied that this has a very significant and imposing effect on the residential areas to the south. I'm not going to say any more in relation to that point. It is the key point, but I think others have addressed the point. It's the scale and height of the development, which I think is caused most consternation. The second point of detail I would pick up on is traffic. Again, I'll try not to repeat anything that's been said. There are several times the number of vehicle movements as a consequence, as one might expect of this hotel development compared with the previous magistrates' court use. Those which are by vehicle, I suspect, will largely be by taxi, given the lack of parking spaces, and they will have to access the site. Now, I don't think it's challenged that the quickest route approaching the hotels from the west will be via St Dunstan's Road and Margravine Gardens. I don't think it's not an option to do a U-turn at North End Road, as I think it's suggested in the report. Those roads, I think all members of the committee will know, suffer severe traffic stress, notwithstanding there are partial one-way systems. Anyone who's driven down those roads will know that even the most minor incident, sometimes not even an accident, but sometimes just two vehicles getting into a logjam with each other, causes huge tailbacks there. Any additional traffic there, it's something which I'm afraid taxis will be attracted to because it's a rat run and a shortcut. Residents can't do very much at all about having to park in their own road, and residents in Margravine Gardens in particular often get trapped in their own road while there is a traffic jam that stays there for, in some cases, hours, and I worry about that. The other point, which is not a point that's been raised previously, and I express it as a question to members of the committee that the committee may wish to put to in questions to officers, is the issue of building design and fire safety. I mean, I'll use a prop here, if I may, which is the building safety, the draft building safety bill that was published yesterday. This is the bill, a substantial bill, that in due course, but that will take at least a year, probably more, will put into effect some of the lessons of Grenfell. And one of the things that has concerned me since Grenfell, and there are many, is that although some, not enough, but some attention has been paid to tall residential buildings and the design of those in relation to means of escape, in relation to cladding and other factors involved in Grenfell, that has not necessarily been the case with hotels, which do not fall into the same category. So I simply ask the committee to assure themselves that not just the current standards of fire safety, but the emerging conclusions of the Grenfell public inquiry and the work that's been done through the Hackett review and elsewhere, and the experts who've given evidence, that this is a priority. If consent is given and these hotels are built, they will be there for a very long time. And I think it would be unfortunate if they squeak under the wire in terms of current building standards when those are likely to change radically in the next year or two. So in conclusion, Chair, again, thank you for your time. I would ask the committee to refuse consent this evening in the hope that the developer, and I would say this as others have said, that this developer has shown a willingness to engage, has shown a willingness to compromise on the design of the scheme, and I understand has paid a premium for the site. But I think they should be prepared to look again at the scale and the impact of the proposal on the area. And on that basis, I hope the committee will send them back to think again tonight. Thank you very much, Chair. And I apologise that when the presentations are finished, I may have to leave you to go off and do yet another Zoom.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you to all of this evening's speakers on this item. I will now move on to members' comments and questions. Just a reminder to try and keep these brief and to the point wherever possible. Just please indicate if you wish to speak. Are there any members who would like to kick us off with a question on this particular item?
Yeah.
Councillor Carmel, please go ahead.
Thank you. I do have a number of questions on this, but to give other committee members a opportunity to speak themselves, I will break it up into sections with your permission. The first is a very, very simple question to officers. How far away from this site is there a taller building than this?
Thank you, Councillor. I'm not aware of precisely whether there is a taller building than this, how far away. I mean, Landmark House, that has permission and is currently in the process of demolition and construction, is a comparable size.
Is this not just a little bit taller than Landmark House?
There may be a fine margin. I don't have the precise height of Landmark House to mind, but it's a comparable height from that scheme.
Okay, now if I can just go to a substantive question. I ploughed through this report, and when I got to paragraph 5.5.12 on page 96 of the report, is it just me, or is that entire paragraph gobbledygook when it comes to the number of trips that will be taken by rail and underground?
That is a specific highways comment, Councillor. I have to pass that over to highways colleagues if they're able to
Feel free.
Respond.
Is anyone able to jump in? Graham, please go ahead.
Chair, I think my colleague Michael Okabaju, as the Highways case officer, is probably just finding that paragraph and will hopefully come in soon.
Well, just
sorry,
what was the just before you start, Michael, it says in the same paragraph within 3 lines that it is anticipated that 2,418 two-way trips will be undertaken by rail and underground, and then it just 2 lines later it says it is estimated that 1,754 total trips will be taken by rail or underground. I mean, it's just completely contradictory, and there's a difference of 664 by my maths number of passengers allegedly travelling by rail, which I think is unlikely, being Olympia being the closest station, or underground. Which is the correct figure, and why have you got it wrong in this paragraph?
That was definitely a mistake, and I apologise for that. And as you can see from table 6.7 below, the figure is meant to be 1,754. And rail, and that includes the underground being Hammersmith Station as well, which is a stone's throw away from the site.
I can't imagine what other underground station it would be, with the possible exception of Barons Court. But if we can move on now to page 98 of the report, and paragraph 5.5.21, and as was touched on by the speakers about the number of coach parking spaces. Now, by any definition of the London plan, it should provide 17 coach parking spaces, one per 50 or part of 50 that applies. This is providing 2, and with a very swift dwell time of 30 minutes per coach to drop off, get all the people inside, get all their luggage off, and this and that and the other. And I noticed that in the PM peak, which I understand is in line with the bus lane regulations of 4 to 7, which is some 3 hours, they're considering 8 coach arrivals during that period. Now, even with my basic O-level, you cannot fit 6 into 8, and even if there's a minute's delay, you are facing potential carnage up on the Talgarth Road as coaches are backing up and having to wait for a slot to be received. And nowhere could I see where the coaches will actually park up when they're not dropping off and picking up. So can you explain why officers' on balance opinion that 2 coach dropping off and picking up places as opposed to a requirement of 17 coach parking places is acceptable, how the PM peak will be handled, and where will the coaches that will have to park up overnight for the tour groups that are going on their various trips around the country, where exactly they will park, and what the impact on traffic will be wherever it is that they will find places to park.
So the trip generation information submitted obviously shows that there's a maximum of 25 over the course of a day, and based on those numbers and the calculations of the dwell times, it was deemed that the 2 could accommodate the requirements. I take that it is somewhat lower than the London plan requirements, but that is just unrealistic with what the space of the site. There's also going to be a hotel management plan secured, which will deal with the booking of the coaches, so we don't anticipate there being any overspill. If you can see on plans that have been submitted, demonstrate that there is space other than the parking spaces to manoeuvre within the new delivery and servicing road.
Well, with the greatest of respect to you, when you claim that the requirements of the London plan are somewhat unrealistic, with respect, the requirement for the number of rooms on that site is somewhat unrealistic, and you say that it's slightly under. It's supposed to be 17. The applicants are proposing 2. That is not slightly under. That is by order of magnitude under. And I go back to the question, which I may have missed your answer, that if you're going to have 2 coaches, parking spaces, with an exceptionally fast turnaround time of half an hour, in my opinion, I think that is exceedingly fast, having grown up over next to a hotel that had plenty of coach uses. I think the half an hour maximum is unduly generous, but I go back to the peak in paragraph 5.5.21. The PM peak is 4 to 7. If each coach is going to have half an hour, how are you going to accommodate 8 coaches?
Sorry, Michael. Michael, sorry to interrupt you there. Just before you answer, can I just suggest that all registered speakers who've already spoken this evening and all those who are still waiting to speak, can I just suggest that you both pop your microphones on mute if it isn't already, and switch off your camera as well if you can. If I can just make that suggestion for all registered speakers, if you could just do that now for me, that would be really helpful. Thank you. Sorry, Michael, and sorry, Councillor Carmel. Please go ahead.
I would just add that the hotel management plan would give powers to, manage it in a way where the 2 dedicated spaces, which would be for servicing vehicles, it would add that flexibility to allow up to 4 spaces. So if after a certain amount of time it was deemed that it was leading to issues, I believe that flexibility to allow coaches to use the 4 spaces in the service road.
Thank you for that additional information. Can you just pull up the plan so I can see where the 2 dedicated coach parking spaces are, and where the 2 spaces in the much needed servicing bay for servicing over 840 hotels are, and what route people who are dropped off in the service bay for potential guests would have to take to get to the main reception area of the hotel.
Peter, I can see you're sharing your screen. Michael, are you going to answer the question? Or
sorry, Peter, do you have the plan up at all?
It is.
Yeah, I'm sharing the screen. Hi, sorry, I'm sharing the screen now. I mean, the receptions are here and here, and the spaces.
Sorry, can you be a little slower with the cursor?
Sorry.
It's sort of flying across the screen. We normally have a laser red pointer, so those of us who are short-sighted can see it. So if you could slow down, I'd be most grateful.
Sorry, Councillor, a bit busy on the cursor. Yeah, Michael can go through in more detail on your answer. The reception area for the South Hotel is in here, and then the South is in here. And then as we go around the service road here, sorry, there's a space here, another space here, and then under a canopy, there's 2 more spaces here. Michael, is there anything in particular in response to the question?
Sorry, I'm just trying to get the plan up myself, but just to add to what I said originally, there are the coach route, the coach spaces are not too far from the delivery and servicing spaces, and the pedestrian routes to each of the buildings are located close by to those coach spaces. So I don't anticipate that being an issue in getting the guests to the hotel.
I'm grateful to you for that response, but having had a little bit of experience in matters like this, the guest experience routes or preference routes from where the hotel wishes guests to be dropped off is very different from the employee experience routes for the servicing areas of the hotel. And I for one, although it's only a matter of minor weight for determining this planning application, think that there is a significant difference between the two. With your permission, Chair, I will let other members of the committee come in now, and I may come back in later if you so permit.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, are there any other members who wish to ask a question on this item in any other areas of the application?
Chair?
Councillor Ubori, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to touch upon some of the residents' main concerns. The first clearly is the scale. It is a huge application with two very large buildings, but my understanding is that that is permissible as it's part of the Hammersmith Town Centre regeneration area, where there are other tall buildings located, albeit perhaps not of this size. Can I just ask, are there any limits on what heights are permissible in this area? If so, how close are we with this application? And also, can I just be absolutely crystal clear that this would be the tallest building in Hammersmith, or is it actually comparable with Lineker Court? I heard officers refer to that in a presentation, or that may have been just in terms of the viewpoint from one position. So if I can have some clarity on how tall we are permitted to go in this area, and also regarding the viewpoint and it's comparable with Lineker Court. And then after that, I have two further clarification points.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm sure Alan can give you a more in-depth answer, but I think as an overview, you're quite right in terms of the local plan policies and the tall building policy within it, and indeed the Hammersmith regeneration area policy that supports it. It is in an area that is considered to be suitable within that policy for tall buildings. There are a range of assessments and criteria in both the local plan and the London plan that Alan can probably expand upon. There isn't necessarily a maximum height. Everything is obviously considered on its own merits without precedent being set by one scheme or another. It very much comes down to location and design and a whole range of measures to go through. Alan, if you've got some more detail on some of those points.
Yeah, sure. So if we start from the starting point where we're within a tall building location, so obviously our policy DC3 sets quite a strong plan-led kind of approach to this, and actually within demonstrating what height is permissible for a scheme to come forward, there are a number of policy questions that need to be asked, which are the criteria A to J within our policy, which actually then create kind of quite a correlated arrangement with policy 7.7 of the London plan. So a lot of what the report covers in terms of design, in terms of the residential amenity, the conservation elements, and are all considered as part of those thresholds and that overall assessment criteria. In terms of the height of the building, obviously that is something that for each individual scheme that comes forward, we have to consider that on its merits on the basis of the supporting information with the application. But as you mentioned, Council, the height of this building would be the tallest building within the town centre. The reference to Lineker Court was specifically within that view, within Margaret Gardens from Barron's Court looking westbound, that actually in that view the building wouldn't sit higher than Lineker Court within that setting.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. If I can now move on to servicing, the servicing of buildings and especially hotels day in, day out can be very disruptive. Am I right in saying that the servicing will be done exclusively through the dedicated servicing road that was highlighted at the start of the presentation and is being created as part of the application?
Yes, Councillor, that's right. A service and delivery management plan is also secured by a condition. If I can just quickly reshare the the presentation, if that's okay, just to
Thank you. Yes, please.
show you. Sorry, bear with me 1 second. So again, here we have the actual service road itself, and that is precisely its purpose. Yes, there is screening all the way around the perimeter, in particular to the south, and there is a canopy here, which actually is probably better seen maybe in this image here. So this is the road coming along the southern boundary here, with the planting and screening, all of which is subject to a condition, of course. And then as they go up here, there is one space, there's another space in terms of waiting to go into the service and delivery area, and then it's under this canopy here in effect, and all of the servicing and deliveries go through that process. Yes.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. 2 final points on 2 incredibly important issues. The first is about fire safety and cladding attached to that, obviously. Could you please just assure the committee, or could an officer please assure the committee, that the building will be entirely safe in terms of fire regulations, both now and, as Andy Slaughter MP referred to, in the future in terms of rules that will come into place? And my second question, perhaps to mention it now to give an officer time to prepare it, the £500,000 secured to mitigate the impact of traffic in this area and create a low traffic neighbourhood. Could an officer please talk to the committee about what that actually means in reality? Are we talking about new traffic light sequencing? Are we talking about additional roads, footpaths? Some clarification about that would be most welcome. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor. Obviously, fire safety is an incredibly sensitive and important subject, and in particular to tall buildings, both commercial and residential. The applicant has required has submitted a fire safety assessment, which, as has probably been said at previous committees, there is a degree of complexity at this stage, given at the planning phase, the design is at the REBA stage, usually 2 or 3. And so the fire assessment sets out the requirements and compliances and what needs to be done by the applicant as it moves through the building regulations phase and the further design refinements through those REBA stages. Officers are, and it's also represented in the GLA stage 1 response from the Mayor, are satisfied with the fire assessment that has been submitted, and that the building can and has been designed to meet the requirements under the building regulations to be entirely safe with regards to fire. In regards to your second point there around the £500,000 contribution, I think that's probably is best described by Graham or Michael from our highways team if they're able to intervene.
Thank you.
Chair?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'll try to keep it brief. There is a bit of history, of course, to Margarine Gardens, and it's worth mentioning that as quick as possible. And Mr. Slaughter has actually described some of the issues that affect this road as opposed to other roads in the borough. In terms of, and of course, the reason we acknowledge that is because I've actually been working with residents for quite a few years and trying to find solutions to the particular problems in that area. We've done quite a lot over the last few years, but there's all been rather tinkering around, trying to ameliorate some of the problems without actually solving the problem. So the big problem, of course, is it is used by rat running traffic. A lot of other roads in the area are also used by rat running traffic, but Margarine Road, for example, and Star Road and Greyhound Road also suffer. But Margarine Gardens, St Dunstan's Road and Beryl Road, just the north, have the problem that actually parallel to the A4. So essentially, the nature of the rat running problem is there's rat running all the time from people who know the route and whatever, but it gets particularly exacerbated when there's problems on the other local roads, because nowadays people use sat-navs and it's based on real-time information. So the biggest problem that happens in Margarine Gardens and Dunstan's Road, apart from lorries getting stuck, which they get stuck frequently, is the other roads in the area are quite congested, and Margarine Gardens becomes an area where residents can't drive out of into the area. The things we've done to date, as I have been tinkering at the problem rather than resolving the problem. We've moved parking around a bit. We put in the box junction at Glidden Road. We put in the lorry ban and other measures. But essentially, the rat running traffic's still there, and it's a way of dealing with the fact there's rat running traffic rather than getting rid of the rat running traffic. And of course, it needs to be said in terms of this development that we think there's a potential for that issue to be exacerbated. And the reason is, as already been mentioned, I think by Mr. Slaughter, is traffic coming from, and taxis in particular, coming from the west, have to get round to the southern carriageway to get into the site. And of course, they can do that in various ways. And the developer's consultant says, the one way they can do it is go along the A4 and do a U-turn at North End Road. And of course, they can do that, and that wouldn't cause any problems to local residential roads. The problem is, though, because a lot of people drive these sat-nav systems using real-time information, as soon as the A4 is blocked, they're not going to go along the A4, wait to queue up and do a U-turn, and the natural route is going to be Fulham Palace Road, St Dunstan's Road, Margarine Gardens. So that's a real problem, to which if we'd been asked a year ago a solution, I don't think we'd be able to offer one. The solution that we're suggesting came about from the scheme that started in the Sands End area yesterday, which is using intelligent smart technology, in particular ANPR cameras, to look at how you can differentiate between people who should have access into the area and people who shouldn't be just driving through. So the intention of a low traffic neighbourhood isn't just smart technology. You can do all sorts of things. You can make one-way roads, blockages, whatever. But we've been through a lot of those possibilities with residents, and all those issues create a problem where residents then are restricted in getting into and out of their own area. So the intention is that we'd look at the whole of the residential area, not just Margarine Gardens, but look at how the combination of traffic management techniques plus this new smart technology can actually deal with actually excluding rat running traffic. Now that might be ANPR cameras at the edges of the whole area, or it might just be something like a smart gate. We've got cameras stopping traffic getting through at a particular point, so everybody can access the area, but you can't drive straight through the area. Otherwise, yes, you'll get a fixed penalty notice. That's all speculation, because the intention of the no traffic neighbourhood would be to work with residents, as we've been doing, I say, for a while, and actually see what solution would work best for them. So that's the intention of the low traffic neighbourhood, and the cameras themselves are fairly expensive, and that would explain the amount of money we're asking and have negotiated for it. I think that answered that. I want to go back to coaches, though, just on the coach parking business. TfL are the highway authority for the A4, and it's interesting. I just checked when the question was being asked, and afterwards the GLA/TfL comments on that, and they are not objecting to coach parking spaces for the site. And I think one reason for that is actually under the intent to publish London Plan, they're dropping that requirement for one coach per 50 bedrooms. I think the other issue, of course, is if there was problems with coaches queuing to get to the site, it's going to be the A4 that's going to have the biggest problem. So I hope that also is a follow-up to the previous question as well, Chair.
It does. Thank you very much for that information, both. Chair, I have no further questions at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members with any comments or questions on this item?
Yes, please. But I think Councillor Harcourt has got his hand raised as well before me.
Okay. Councillor Harcourt, would you like to go first?
Okay, thank you, Chair. Can I continue with this discussion around traffic, rat running, low traffic neighbourhoods? It's a subject very close to my own heart, having had some issues in South Fulham of a similar nature to deal with. What is the preferred or the supposed route that traffic coming from the west, be it taxis, be it construction vehicles or whatever, are meant to use to get to this particular site?
Chair, Michael could perhaps say a bit more about service traffic, but I think Councillor Murphy mentioned construction logistics and construction traffic not using Margarine Gardens, and for sure we wouldn't approve of that. The information supplied by the developer on construction traffic is, let's put it this way, a little light at the moment. So what we would do is we'd work with them once they got a contractor appointed and they got proposals, and work with our network management people to make sure they followed appropriate main route networks. There isn't a direct answer to that at the moment, but apart from the fact that the construction logistics plan would be conditioned to be a requirement of the development.
Okay, so if that is something that's got to be construction logistics plan is something that's going to be done. Given the sensitivity of this and the fact that all you need is one lorry to try and get down Margravine Gardens and get stuck, and the problems that is likely to cause, is that something that perhaps we would? I would like to see that logistics plan before assuming we were to give approval.
Sorry, Councillor Harcourt, just to clarify, are you requesting that if approval is given, any future submitted CLP returns to committee for your information and approval?
Yep. That is correct, sorry. Okay, moving on from the traffic issue. One of the speakers raised the point about the configuration, not necessarily maybe I've misheard, but certainly it was not saying that the 840 whatever it is hotel rooms wasn't the objection. It was actually the height. What discussions have officers had with the developer regarding the configuration to see whether in fact that tower height could be reduced and the number of rooms spread over different parts of the hotel buildings?
Yeah, I can answer probably the first part. I don't know if Alan wants to add anything if I miss it, Councillor, but obviously we are aware, of the previous application that is still pending. To be clear, of course, we're considering the one that's in front of committee this evening. But following that, and as the applicant has set out, taking on board various concerns, this proposal on the massing has been submitted and therefore has been assessed on its own merits and the impacts that it has. In terms of the discussions that took place with officers in formulating the massing and the height that this proposal consists of, there is a series of alternatives set out within the design and access statement that do go into the detail of the need around servicing lifts, floor plates, room efficiencies and so on and so forth. A large part of the focus was in terms of reducing the height to as far away from the southern boundary as possible, and that is what has happened as set out in the report. The western, eastern and southern bounding buildings were all a fair way below the previous scheme. That has resulted in, even though it's the same stories, there has been a slight increase in height of this northern building, although there has been a marked shift from the flank elevations. So the applicant architects have arrived at the massing that they consider to be the most deliverable in terms of engineering, floor plates, room sizes, that is their brief. And officers' assessment of that is that the impacts are the most acceptable have been presented.
Okay, thanks for that. You mentioned the previous application, and while this is perhaps slightly too strong a word to use, but it seemed to be being presented to us almost as if it was the sword of Damocles over our head. If we don't accept this one, the other one will come in and it's a lot worse. Now, I don't know what the previous application was or what the situation is, and I appreciate that we are actually here looking at what's in front of us rather than anything else. But very often we do end up in a situation where there are two planning applications, not necessarily in parallel, but over a period of time. One of which gets accepted, one of which is there, and giving the applicant the option of popping back to the previous one. So I'm just interested to know what the situation is regarding that, what we're up against, so to speak.
I can step in if you like, Chair.
Yes,
it's Matt Butler, Head of Development Management. Yes, there is an extant permission that is currently being held in abeyance while this one is going through the assessment process, decision-making process. So clearly the applicants want to keep that as an option, and I think the applicant referenced this application in their presentation earlier. So yes, it's obviously an existing permission that the applicant can pursue in the event that this one is refused. Obviously, it's gone over the determination period as well, so it's likely that the applicant could also appeal on the previous application, where it would then go to the planning inspectorate for determination. As we understand it from what the applicant has told us, they do need to do something with the site. I think it was referenced earlier. They've invested heavily in the site, and clearly at some point they will need to move forward with gaining some permission for the site. So if this one was to fail, then there is a likelihood that they will need to revert back to the previous application.
Okay, thanks for that, Mr. Butler. The previous application, it's an extant application. It hasn't received permission yet, has it? Or has it? Just to be clear.
No, sorry, perhaps I shouldn't use the word extant. Sorry, just to be absolutely clear, it's a current application that's yet to be determined. Apologies if it may have been a slip of the tongue. Apologies.
Okay, thank you. I've got, Chair, I've got one further area that I want to explore, which
Yes,
is this issue of the impact that this development is going to have on the various conservation areas, the Margravine Cemetery, the memorials and so on. And in the report, it talks about less than substantial harm. In those situations, we then have to weigh up the less than substantial harm against the public benefit. Could somebody just take me through the thinking on that, and whether and how the public benefit outweighs the impact of this development is likely to have on those conservation areas, if that makes sense?
Peter, do you want me to start on this and then we can go?
Yeah, I think, Alan, if you go through the
So if just to explain, Councillor, I think the starting point is obviously with the assessment of harm upon the heritage assets. If in the report we've tried to make that very clear about there are a number of different mechanisms that we have to go through to undertake that assessment. Firstly, if I touch upon the conservation areas themselves, so obviously this development, because of its scale, will have wider visibility and therefore will have an impact upon a series of different conservation areas within the borough. In terms of that impact, I think we need to be very clear about the nature of the impact we're assessing. So because the development site itself isn't within a conservation area, a lot of that impact is actually around the setting of the conservation area and how that enables us to preserve and enhance the conservation area overall. So what we've tried to do in the report is try to be very clear about the fact that, similar to the outcomes of the consultation with Historic England, that the overall assessment and balance there is actually that within those conservation areas, the harm will be towards the less than substantial range at the lower end of that scale. And that's for each of the conservation areas based upon that assessment of the significance overall of the conservation area and the assessment of the impact on their setting as well. So I think just to clarify on that and to kind of cement that view, is that the conservation area overall, its character and its significance is preserved by the fact that we're not considering a proposal within the area itself. The main element of significance that is questioned is around its setting and the intervisibility between the tall building and the other elements of the site and these conservation areas overall. In terms of the other heritage assets, a similar test is applied. So again, the site doesn't include any designated or non-designated heritage assets, but there are a number found within the setting and wider environment around the site. And again, taking a similar view to that assessment, the degree of harm is towards the less than substantial range, and again to the lower end of that scale as well when considered cumulatively. So that's the starting point from that consideration. I think if Peter maybe comes on to the other elements of balance that we've equated as part of that weighted judgment, but I think the other part from my perspective is in terms of the design of the scheme, how that relates to the heritage asset, particularly, sorry, the non-designated heritage asset, particularly the ARP, and the relationship in terms of the quality between the two developments. That is something that we consider to be of a high quality within the townscape, in terms of its, built form, materiality, and overall architectural intent, really. So don't know whether Peter, you want to follow with that in terms of the other balance.
Yes. So I think the important reference there from Alan's explanation, Councillor, is that it is at the lower end of less than substantial harm. In terms of the setting of a conservation area. And so the benefits that are considered to outweigh that, and obviously a balancing exercise takes place as set out within guidance in the MPPF, is that the opening up of the site, the permeability that is created, the public access that is considered to be a benefit. There's also, pardon me, the creation of public use, the meeting rooms for free for community that are going through, the economic benefits that derive from the application in terms of jobs and training opportunities that come in there. Things like the the actual architecture and the improvements to the site. They're all considered to have a benefit in and of themselves, and when grouped together and weighted are considered to outweigh the less than substantial harm at the lower end that has been identified.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Just one final point. If you want to see a really tall building, come up to my ward. The Imperial College development has got a 34-storey high tower block.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Harcourt had a proposal there regarding bringing the construction logistics plan back to committee for approval. That's pretty much the summary of what you proposed, I think, there, Councillor Harcourt. Would that be correct? Yes. Okay. Good. Would any other members like to second that proposal?
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Sadiq. Okay, yeah, I will vote on that proposed amendment at the end of the item with the other votes, so I won't forget about that amendment. Councillor Perez, I believe you had some questions on this item.
Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to follow up on some of the points raised by Councillor Murphy. In relation to condition 3, the community liaison group, I'm looking at the information that we received, and it's saying that an informative has been added at page 37 of the report, but there is no reason why the informative cannot be part of condition 3. And his specific request is please move the informative into condition 3. So I just wanted to know if that was possible. And also, if I could please have just a reminder, a summary of what the terms of reference of the community liaison group, please. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor. The informative itself was worked up in conjunction with residents and listening to their concerns and liaising in turn between officers and the applicant. To be clear, as I'm sure you're aware, conditions do have to be agreed with the applicant. They cannot necessarily be enforced upon them. And there are tests that need to be met in terms of reasonableness, necessity and enforcement and so on. I don't think there's necessarily a problem subject to the applicant's approval to move the informative wording into condition 3 to inform those bullet points through. But as I say, it's something we can do, and the applicant for us to agree prior to any issue of a decision should planning permission be agreed. In terms of the terms of reference, again, examples, for instance, from the civic redevelopment of the King Street have been shared with residents as an example of what the terms of reference would be. They do change site by site and circumstances, and they are required to be submitted to officers to be agreed to as to how they would engage, and they would normally cover things like how they would cover the cost of the meeting, how often the meetings would be, if in the event a meeting couldn't be held, how that would be satisfied, sharing of information, timeframes, locations, and so on and so forth, who would be invited, what members, what resident associations members. It's that level of detail that goes in, and we as officers would approve that as per any other condition, to ensure that they do satisfactorily engage with residents as is required and as council obviously supports.
Thank you very much. I personally would welcome that community liaison group added to condition 3. Hopefully as well the applicant would take into account the importance of this group and the views of the different residents and representatives of the different parties, and for that conversation and conversations to take part on a regular basis. The other question that I've got is in relation to condition 38, which Councillor Murphy also raised on page 27. The hours of use for outside seating and rooftop terrace have been changed from 8 o'clock in the morning to 11 p.m. At night, whereas before it was it was 8 o'clock before, whereas now it's 6:30 in the morning until 11 p.m. Why is there a change from 8 a.m. to 6 a.m., please?
Yes, Councillor. So the previous hours, to be clear, that's set out within the report that was in the published agenda for the other application, which obviously wasn't debated at committee. The applicant has requested that the morning hours are brought forward to 6:30, and this is in part because of the change of design. There's now an enclosed courtyard there, the ancillary restaurants and seating areas that now form a much more active and engaging public realm within the centre of the two hotels, the purpose of which is obviously the public are able to access those and use those, but primarily they're ancillary to the two hotels and the guests having breakfast and so on. And the principal reason is the applicant has requested that they are able to utilise those outdoor seating areas to serve breakfast during the appropriate seasons and weather conditions. Now, officers have had consideration to that and consider that to be a reasonable request, and therefore it's in the condition. With respect to the level of an enclosure that is in there, in the courtyard primarily, now, there is a 5-storey hotel building to that southern boundary, and it is a town centre location. And so having restaurant seating at 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, especially for hotel uses, isn't necessarily unusual. And with regard to the surrounding environmental characteristics of the 24-hour Piccadilly line to the south, the BP station, the car wash and so on, it was considered that any level of activity that may take place within that area, within the courtyard, would be acceptable. I can understand concerns in terms of the roof terrace, but again, due to the level of screening and the height that provides additional separation to those nearest properties, and background levels in terms of the railway line, the BP garage, the A4 and so on, it was not considered that would result in any unacceptable harm.
Thank you. One last question, please. Can you, in relation to section 106 and heads of terms, can you please tell me a little bit more about the economy and the contribution of £450,000 comprising local employment and local jobs, please?
Yes, sorry, Matt, did you want to go through these?
Well, I think it's more particular about the employment and training contribution, which was negotiated. That was in conjunction with our economic colleagues. They're fairly standard contributions that we secure, which are basically there is a formula behind them in relation to the size of the scheme, the build costs, and what we derive from that in terms of number of apprenticeships and what we'd be seeking in terms both in the construction and operational phase. And then related to that then is a contribution to help us administer the process in conjunction with the applicant. And there's also payments in the event that they're not able to secure apprenticeships for individual for each of the posts or the identified number we're seeking. So it's something we secure along with as we do on all these major schemes. It's a fairly sort of standard Section 106 head of term.
Thank you very much. That's it from me. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Perez. Councillor Carmel, I believe you had some further questions on this item.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just start off with a comment that was alluded to earlier, and the mention of the sword of Damocles holding over us. I remember doing a lot of reading for the previous application, only to turn up at the committee and find that I'd wasted sort of 10 hours of research into the application to find out that it had been pulled on that evening. But the principal as cause of that being pulled on the evening was concern over the height. Now that was a 22-storey main block. So they pull a scheme because it's 22 stories and there's concern over the height, and yet they come back a few months later with a 23-story scheme. And whilst I'm judging each application on the merits, my eyebrow or one of my eyebrows in good Roger Moore style is somewhat raised. But I just want to go back to the question of traffic. Now, Hammersmith Broadway and King Street has reduced traffic flow, which reflects the reduced traffic during the current pandemic. We know not, and perhaps Wes will be able to tell us, whether these reduced lane widths will become permanent. But as almost a lifelong Fulham resident, I know that traffic trying to come off the Talgarth Road to go past the former Magistrates Court often tails back to the BP garage. And if you're adding an extra, 5,400 journeys a day, and I think the modal split between the various trip generations is, shall we say, somewhat favourable to the applicants. We also haven't seemed to have factored in, as far as I can tell from the transport study, the effect on traffic flow in the neighbourhood by the imposition of any cycle superhighways, which also leads in to Hammersmith, into Hammersmith Grove. I also further want to mention that I have had the privilege of laying on Remembrance Day a wreath at the Lions Memorial in Margravine Cemetery. The bleakness of its setting is outstanding, and as I stood there on the 11th of November in 2009, I marvelled at the way that it stood out against anything, and the effect of putting something in the background that would detract from that beautiful setting is something that worries me greatly. And just finally, I will say that I will be voting against this application. It has been a hard decision. I think that Richard and Jay, who spoke earlier, gave some of the finest applicant speeches that I've certainly heard on this committee, but not just on balance. I think there is a clear weight in favour of refusing this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Carmel. Are there any other comments or questions on this item?
Chair, just a very quick comment if possible.
Yes.
Thank you. It's just regarding the section 106 heads of terms. Although I acknowledge and accept what a previous speaker, Andy Slaughter, said regarding the impact of housing on the site in terms of community benefit, there does appear to be significant financial contributions made towards the community. Just briefly adding up the totals, some £8 million. A very small aspect of this, which perhaps isn't included in the heads of terms, and I would request that it is inserted, is just regarding community access to the hotels, if indeed permissions granted this evening. I think I'm right in saying on a previous briefing note I saw that the community would have access to things like free meeting rooms for residents groups and those sorts of things. And I just wanted to make sure that in the event of this proposal going through, that still is maintained. So just flagging it, and I appreciate we delegate authority to the head of planning regarding that, if indeed it's permitted. But I just wanted to flag that I think it's important not to miss out on that.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other comments or questions on this item before we move to a vote?
Comment, Chair.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think it's a very well designed scheme, quite frankly. We were going through the opposite presentation. I don't have an intrinsic problem with high buildings. It's just the location. I think the way that this has been located, it has a way of the least possible impact on the surrounding areas. I think the designers should be patted on the back for coming up with this scheme, original scheme. So I will certainly be voting for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ahern. Are there any other final comments or questions on this application before we move to a vote?
Chair.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. If this application goes ahead this evening or approved this development, my question is from the officers, what sort of regarding to the traffic, what sort of implication we are expecting within the next 10 years in the area? And the second part of my question is there any conflict with the aviation route? If this building is like tallest building, 23 stories in this area, is there any conflict with the aviation route, or do we have any information about this? Oh.
Thank you. So I think Graham or Michael, you would be the first half of that question. So impact on traffic over the next 10 years.
On the ground and in the air.
And in the air, yeah.
Okay, Chair. Yeah, I was looking at Department of Transport website this morning, which gives local counts in the area and actually shows the change in traffic flows over the period 2000-2018, and it is a dwindling amount of road traffic, and actually surprisingly seen decreases. Now, if somebody wants me to say what will result from COVID, I simply can't, and I'm not sure anybody can. I think just to go back to what Councillor Carmel said, I was looking at these figures because there's counts at screen places across the borough at key points, and I was just trying to work out the percentage of traffic generated from this site compared with, for example, the traffic on the A4, and I couldn't get that beyond, I was always under 1%, so it's not something that would be modelled or considered significant in terms of the impact on the main roads in the area. It's very much the local roads and the local access roads, which we've been through in detail, that has a risk which we're trying to mitigate.
is there an officer able to comment on mitigation that's taken regarding impact on aviation of this tall building in Hammersmith?
Yes, Chair. In short, no. I believe the height that triggers that level of engagement and flight is around 92 metres. So it is significantly above this.
I would support higher buildings than to stop aircraft flying over us.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other comments or questions on this item before we move to?
Can I just come back with a comment on the traffic flows and the answer we've just received?
Sure.
It's not just this building; it's the cumulative impact of other things that we as a council have done to try and promote Hammersmith as a place to do business. If I remember correctly, and I could be wrong, and don't quote me on it, the Olympia decision was an extra 8,500 journeys a day. This is an extra 5,500 or 5,400. There have been very, very many applications that we have granted in this immediate neighbourhood, it being the town centre where special relaxation has gone. And we as a committee need to assess the cumulative impact, not only of this, but other schemes that might be coming through. So, for instance, the possible implementation of the cycle lane, the potential, however remote, for the tunnelization of the A4 flyover, which would directly impact on this. And, you know, quite frankly, I don't believe that enough attention has been paid to the cumulative effects of this. And on that, I shall quieten down.
Okay.
Chair, before we put to the vote, can you ask an officer assessment of Councillor Harcourt's amendment before we vote on it?
Yes, so that amendment is officers are happy with that amendment. That's my understanding, and we can take a vote on it just before we vote on the other recommendations. Would an officer just like to confirm that for me?
It should be a planning officer actually responding to this, but I do recall that a CLP was considered by committee a while ago for Mackenzie Trench House in Lily Road, so it's certainly not a precedent. Maybe planning officer would like to comment.
Yeah, sorry, Chair, through the Chair. Sorry, it's an inherent issue, I guess, with these virtual committees, somebody waiting for somebody else. Yes, I can confirm that there isn't a problem with that from the planning officer's point of view.
Great, thank you. Okay, so just before we move to a vote, are there any other final comments or questions on this item from members? Okay, in which case then, we will start off.
Sorry, Rachel, is it possible for me to ask a question? I realise I'm not a member of the committee.
It's not possible for you to ask a question. Sorry, Councillor.
Okay, I fully understand. If it's not possible, then that's fine. Those are the rules of the game.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'll move on now to the voting unless any other members have a question. No, okay, wonderful. So I will start with the amendment from Councillor Harcourt, and I'll be asking each of whether the amendment and each of the recommendations in the report are agreed, with reference to the addendum as well, and then I'll be calling on each member in turn to give their vote. Please respond with either for, against or not voting. So if I can start with Councillor Harcourt's amendment, which was seconded by Councillor Sadiq, regarding bringing the construction logistics plan back to committee for oversight and approval. So if I can start with Councillor Ahern.
For.
Councillor Harcourt.
For.
Councillor Carmel.
For.
Councillor Perez.
For.
Councillor Sadiq.
For.
Councillor Thorley.
For.
Councillor Ubroy.
For.
Okay, thank you very much. So that's that amendment agreed. If I can draw your attention to recommendation 1 in the report, considering the addendum and the amendment that we've just made, and that's recommendation 1 on page 12, which reads, subject to there being no contrary direction from the Mayor for London, that the Chief Planning Officer be authorised to grant planning permission upon the completion of a satisfactory legal agreement and subject to the conditions listed below. So Councillor Ahern?
For.
Councillor Harcourt?
For.
Councillor Carmel?
Against.
Councillor Perez?
For.
Councillor Sadiq?
For.
Councillor Thorley?
Against.
Councillor Uberoy?
For.
Okay, and I also vote for the recommendation. So that is that recommendation agreed by committee. If I can now draw your attention to recommendation 2 in the report, which again is on page 12 and taking heed of the addendum, which reads that the Chief Planning Officer, after consultation with the Head of Law and the Chair of the Planning and Development Control Committee, be authorised to make any minor changes to the proposed heads of terms of the legal agreement or conditions, which may include the variation, addition or deletion of conditions. Any such changes shall be within their discretion. So beginning with Councillor Ahern.
For.
Councillor Harcourt.
For.
Councillor Carmel.
Not voting, and if I may, I think just reading this, this is
just not voting.
Sorry,
Okay.
Councillor
Okay.
Carmel. Thank you. Councillor Perez.
For.
Councillor Sadiq.
For.
Councillor Thorley.
For.
Councillor Uberoy.
For.
And I also vote for that recommendation, which means that application is approved. Thank you very much for everyone, the officers presenting on that item and tonight's speakers on that item as well. Can I just make a suggestion, if I may, to committee? We're now just over 2 hours into this evening's proceedings. We still have 3 items remaining. So I've not done this before in one of our virtual planning and development control committees, but I'm going to suggest, if I may, a short comfort break for members and
agreed.
Hooray!
Wonderful. So what will be happening now is that one of our officers, David Abbott, will be muting everyone's microphones. Can I also suggest you switch off your cameras? And David will be placing a holding message on YouTube for those of you who are watching online. So we'll be back in 5 minutes' time. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. If we can now move on to item 7, which is Bishop's Park Tennis Courts. If I can begin by asking the presenting officer, Roy Astagba-Power, to please introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd just like to draw members' attention to the addendum. There was a late letter received from the applicant recently seeking a deferral for the item based on corrections that they were wanting in the report. These matters are addressed in the addendum, and it's considered that none of these changes affect the planning assessment. They mainly relate to the inclusion and alterations to policy considerations, which were taken into account. It's just making sure the policy numbers are included. Also, for your attention, Chair, on page 158, there's a clarification of the recommendation, which it appears to have come out wrongly in terms of the template report that we have. But yeah, OK. The other thing to point out, which is a verbal, if you like, addendum, it is included in the presentation, but it's referenced to the fact that the application site currently is the subject of an enforcement notice, which was issued on the 15th of June, and compliance date for that is the 15th of September. And the concern there is essentially to remove the glass enclosures. OK, I'm going to share my screen. Might take a few seconds. So I'm just going to start from the beginning. The application site relates to the Bishop's Park tennis courts. It relates to the retention of some fencing and glass surrounds around the existing tennis courts to create 3 paddle court stroke mini tennis courts. The fencing measures 4 meters in height and the glass screens are 3 meters in height. But it does vary in some places around the enclosures. By way of background, the council, obviously, in its role as landowner, owns the site because it's one of our parks. In that role, it granted lease of the part of the site, which is the tennis courts, to the applicant to use it as a paddle court, and that was subject to planning permission being granted. But that lease process is a separate process from this planning process. It's quite distinct. So the application needs to be considered on its own planning merits. Just for reference, in February, planning permission was refused for a similar scheme, which was refused on the grounds of noise to neighbouring residents and also visual obtrusiveness from the enclosures, which interrupted the sense of openness. I've already mentioned there's an enforcement notice that's been issued. The current application, following on from the previous application, has been amended to include, or rather exclude, some existing signage and also to remove from the drawings 2 wire mesh fences. This is the application site in red and the wider application site in blue. I'm not sure, can you see my cursor moving around the site?
No.
Yes, we can.
Yep.
You see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. OK, it's just really highlighting that the courts in question are these ones here, which are 1, 2, 3 and a mini court here in this location. So the site itself is sandwiched between Bishop's Avenue, which is to the south, and Bishop's Park Road, which is to the north. And then fronting Bishop's Park Road are the Bishop Park Mansions, which front the whole of the road, which is straddled by a road in the middle. OK. The site itself is in the Bishop Park's conservation area, so you can see from the arrow where the site is in relation to the residential property, which is to the north, and the tennis courts form part of a wider park area, which is obviously Bishop's Park, which is itself a historic park of heritage value, and then because the park extends down to the river frontage, the Thames policy area is relevant. This is just trying to show in more detail the 3 relevant courts which are highlighted in bold, and it's just these 3 courts. So again, to the north you have the mansion blocks. This is a before and after shot, if you like. The top right corner is before the paddle courts were in place, and what you can see in the middle where the arrow is, there's some pink courts which are 3. 2 of them you can see. One of them is buried underneath the shadow of the canopy, and then there's another one just to the left underneath the Rocks Lane wording, which is another mini court which will be retained, and it's basically that which has changed. So that's how it was, and then the bottom picture to the left is how it is now. So you've got these 2 paddle courts, and you've got another paddle court here, and then underneath this canopy area is the retained mini court. So effectively, previously there were 4 junior courts and 1 adult court, and now there are 3 paddle courts and 1 adult court. At street level, so on the left you have the mansion blocks, on the right hand side you have the line of trees, and beyond that is the tennis courts. This is looking a bit closer. So you can see the paddle courts, the surface area there is blue, and they extend from this tree in the foreground to the 3rd one along. So between there and there. And what you can see in between that space are some frames, which are black frames. And if you think of double glazing, if you like, the tennis courts had a Y-gauze lightweight structure around them. And then inside of that, they have installed these more substantive black frames, which are supporting structures partly for the plastic stroke glass screens, but I shall come on to that later. But the only other thing to point out on this slide is that you can see here to the right that there are views more easily through the park to the tennis courts beyond, whereas some of these views here are interrupted by the structures which have been introduced. This is looking from Bishop's Avenue, so the other side, so you see the line of trees on Bishop's Park Road, and then one of the paddle courts in the foreground. This is looking a little bit closer, so if you look at the top right, there's a little location plan, which is intended to be helpful. And what you see there is just in this location is a grass strip. That grass strip is here. So what you see in front of you is the end of one of the courts here with the signage in front. Sorry, keeps jumping. Just to point out, these lights are existing and don't form part of the proposal. Again, you see here the treatment on the boundary. So you can just about make out here a green boundary fence, which relates to would have related to the tennis courts. And then inside of that, you have this black fence, which extends above the height of the green fence. And you might be able to make out there are some plastic glass screens here. I'll come to that shortly. This picture was taken probably on a slightly misty day, but it's quite helpful because what it does show is where the screens are. So you can see here, this is where you are in terms of the location. This red dot is where you'd be standing, looking southwest. And there's that strip of grass, if you like, here. And what you have is a screen on the back edge of the court, an equivalent screen on the top edge of the court. Along the sides, you would have some screens which are part of the game that's played. So just looking at that in context, so this is one of the courts which is shown here, which is a red U shape, if you like, at top and bottom. And if you think of that and think that the picture on the left at the bottom is the blue area, if you like, is the glass. And the area above that, which is grey, is the heightened fence. So it goes up to 4 meters. And then the glass goes up to 3 meters. This longer elevation is a side elevation. So if you like, on the return elevation, you get some glazing or glass as part of the game that's played, which is visible. And then you get this aerial shot, which is a perspective, looking over the site. Again, looking southwest. This is if you like, the two ends of the court. And what you have here is the black fencing. And then this is at ground level, that same view. And then this is how it was before all the fencing was introduced with the paddle courts. And just by way of interest, this red line here is the line of where one of the fences has now been removed. So in response to consultation, we had just under 300 representations. These are listed and cited on page 159 of the officer report. And you can see there were 242 letters in support and 52 letters of objection. Overall, when you look at the support letters, they obviously outnumber the number of objections, but significantly, the objections, 40 of the 52 are from residents who live in Bishop's Road and more particularly in Bishop's Mansions. Okay, so that's that frontage. And then you have some significant other group who didn't give their details in terms of addresses, just 30. And then also there are some properties in Cloncurry Street, which is to the rear, not fronting the site, but to the rear and not visible. And also in 2 Fulham Palace Road, which is to the right, some distance away from the site. And closer roads at Woodlawn Road, which is here, which bisects Bishop's Road. There were no objections. And similarly, Stevenage Road, which is down in the south sort of west corner, there were no objections. So just to point out that in terms of objections, 40 out of the 52, that's 80% of the objectors live opposite the actual site. And of those who support it from Bishop's Mansions, 24 live in the surrounding streets as well. In total, sort of Bishop's Mansions and the surrounding streets, it's about 10% of those people that supported the application. So just to bring to your attention again, there were lots of other people who objected. People as far away as Shrewsbury, Bishop Stortford in Hertfordshire. Obviously, there are people that come to use the site for its sporting activities, but they're not necessarily people that live adjacent to the activity. So those that objected obviously were concerned about the obtrusiveness of the structures, then considered to be out of character. Also, the noise generated by the use of the activity. There were some references to the colour of the courts being painted another colour. The colouring of the court is permitted development. Floodlighting, I mentioned before, that's already in existence and doesn't require consent. So the main issues in terms of the planning issues are that there was some concern about changing the tennis courts to paddle courts. They fall in the same use class and effectively it's permitted development, so it doesn't need permission for that change of use. The concern is about the nature of the paddle courts and the intensification of the use. So if I just go back to one of the photographs, what you see here is one of the screens on the back of the court. And if I go back to this U-shaped court, so if you're playing within this court, what would happen is it's like a hybrid of squash and tennis. But these screens, when you crash the ball against these screens, it makes quite a noise and resonates and disturbs some of the local residents. And that's what some of them residents have objected to. And that's a significant concern for planning officers as well. So from officer's point of view, we've looked at these proposals. Although some signage has been removed, although some wire mesh has been removed, the concerns in terms of policy are to protect the open space, to ensure that the historic park is protected in terms of its character and the conservation area, part of which is the openness. The other thing to point out is obviously the quality of the Thames policy area, which tries to enhance the quality of the environment. And we consider that the enclosures, including the glass and mesh fencing, would visually interrupt the openness, as it did previously under the previous refusal. and the scale and location results in less than substantial harm in terms of NPPF. Now then we move on to residential amenity. The Bishop's mansions are some 25 to 30 metres away, depending on where you are and which court you're located in. The applicants submitted a noise impact assessment, unlike on their previous application. A survey was carried out between 10 and 12 a.m. in the morning on a particular day, with survey work being carried out either side of that, but it was only on one day. But I think more importantly, the mitigation measures that would normally be required to sort of reduce the noise impact would normally involve an acoustic barrier, and it's considered that such a barrier would be impractical in relation to stopping noise to the mansions opposite, because it would have to be so high that it would be visually harmful and create another set of problems. Similarly, if you were to enclose the courts, give it a roof and then make it effectively a box, that in itself would create another set of issues because it still harms a sense of openness. So from officers' point of view, we didn't enter into any sort of further negotiation because we felt there was no prospect of an acceptable scheme being achieved. So then in terms of the MPF overall planning balance and impact on the heritage assets, you have to balance out the disadvantages against the benefits. And we consider that the harmful noise to residents is significant. The visual obtrusiveness of the enclosures is significant. And the reduced sense of openness is harmful. On the flip side, obviously there is going to be an increase in the range of sports facilities. These facilities are popular. And they provide a source of exercise which is healthy, and job creation for the applicants who are using the facility, albeit in an unauthorised manner at the moment. There is also access to free use for state primary school users in the borough, so I should point that out. In conclusion, we feel that the benefits resulting from the proposals do not outweigh the harm caused to heritage assets. The enclosures add visual clutter and harm the sense of openness. The nature of the use and its close proximity to Bishop Mansions is unacceptable in terms of its noise impact. On that basis, officers are recommending that the application be refused on the grounds of visual amenity and residential amenity, subject to the addendum. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Thank you. Rory, could you just pop yourself on mute there? Thank you. Okay, if I can now invite registered speakers on this item. So that is Ms. Vivian, is it Heilbron or Heilbron? Speaking on behalf of residents of Bishop's Mansions. And I also have a Pippa Grieve. Pippa, are you speaking as well, or is it just Vivian this evening?
Chair, it's Vivian Heilbrun speaking on behalf of herself and also Pippa Grieve.
Okay, fantastic. Vivian, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear
Wonderful. Me? Vivian, absolutely, I can. Vivian,
shall I turn my camera on now?
It's entirely up to you. If you want to pop your camera on, you absolutely can. But if you'd rather keep it off, that's fine as well.
No, that's fine.
Wonderful. Okay, Vivian. So you have 5 minutes in which to address committee, and I'll let you know when your time is up.
Thank you very much. Good evening. I'm speaking on behalf of the board of Bishop's Mansions Limited and those who oppose the retrospective application before the committee. We're the Residents' Association of the 148 flats that are directly adjacent to and overlook the tennis courts and bowling greens in Bishop's Park. The applicants, Rocks Lane, have constructed 3 paddle courts on the tennis courts at Bishop's Park. They've done this without seeking planning permission, and as a multi-site and multi-sport business, they would surely have been well aware that planning consent would be needed to erect the court structures, and therefore to do this without consent or consultation was a cynical and actually rather aggressive move that took no account of the negative impact their actions would have on the character and appearance of the area, which is a conservation area, or on the lives of their immediate neighbours. Another effect of erecting these structures without going through the planning process and starting to play paddle in this location over the last year has been to generate a large database of players who they can now call upon to support this retrospective application. Paddle is an outdoor racket sport played with a hard bat on a hard surface and against solid walls. The game is fast-paced and balls hit the ground and the walls at high speed. It often involves 4 players on the one court and generates much more frustration and elation in players than tennis does. The web page for the paddle courts at Bishop's Park highlights that it is an incredibly social game and describes the design of the court and the rules of the game itself as lending itself to long and highly dynamic rallies. The applicants have erected the 3 courts directly adjacent to each other, thus creating an agglomeration of noise where up to 12 players can be playing 3 fast-paced and noisy games involving up to a dozen players in an area no bigger than a normal tennis court. The volume and type of noise generated is completely different from any noise that has ever emanated from the tennis courts in Bishop's Park. At our recent AGM, many residents complained about the noise nuisance they were suffering in their homes as a result of the paddle games being played for up to 12 hours a day. It's not the case that all the flats in Bishop's Mansions have been affected by the noise generated by paddle, but it is, however, the case that if the Planning Committee grant consent for the paddle courts, they will effectively be blighting a significant number of residential dwellings with bedrooms, living spaces and balconies overlooking these courts. Furthermore, if planning consent is granted, there's also the potential for many more residential dwellings to be negatively impacted by large events involving crowds and alcohol, such as the one applied for in August 2019. We note that the applicants have submitted a noise impact report with his second attempt to gain retrospective planning consent, the findings of which we believe are misleading in key ways. The report is careful not to say that 12 players were playing on the 3 courts during the time of monitoring. On the day of the sound monitoring, we think it is safe to assume, therefore, that 6 players, that's 50% capacity, were chosen by the applicants to play a polite game of paddle, gentle, without shouting at any point. This would have been a pale approximation of the true noise impact that has been generated from these courts over the past year. The report concluded that the playing of paddle on 3 courts did not add to the noise level experienced by residents living in Bishop's Mansions in any way at all. This was based on the findings that ambient noise without play was not at an appreciably different level from the noise level measured during play. This is absurd and a misleading conclusion because numerous residents have clearly stated that they experience an unacceptable and intrusive level of noise nuisance from the paddle matches. The issue here is the methodology used. Integrated and peak noise measurements, such as those used in the report, do not reflect the human experience of noise. The range of sound generated when playing paddle is of a completely different order to tennis in terms of hard bat, hard walls, and sudden shouting. And this is precisely what upsets residents the most. High intensity sound, but with sudden onset and brief duration, makes the noise dramatically more intrusive. In fact, the shorter the length of the sound, the more it is experienced in an adverse way, a quote, like a gun going off. We can find no examples of planning consent ever having been granted for paddle coasts this close, 26 metres to residential dwellings. Further evidence of the inappropriateness of this location for playing this particular sport. The paddle noise generated has definitely changed the character of this conservation area, and the erection of the walls of the court and other associated paraphernalia has had a negative impact on the appearance of the conservation area. We believe it is not appropriate to install paddle courts in this particular location, not that there is anything bad about paddle as a game. I therefore sincerely hope that the Planning Committee will reject this retrospective application and protect both local residents' rights to peaceful enjoyments of their homes, as well as protecting the character and appearance of this historic conservation area that many of us hold so dear. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Vivian. You might now want to pop your microphone on mute and
sure,
turn your screen off. If I can now call on the applicant, Chris Warren, and Ms. Rosemary Hutchins, speaking in support of the application. Now, Mr. Warren, I understand that you'll be speaking for 3 minutes and 15 seconds, and that Ms. Hutchins, you're planning on speaking for 1 minute and 45 seconds. So if I can ask Chris to unmute yourself now.
Okay.
And Chris, whenever you're ready, and I'll let you know when your time is up.
Good evening. I'm Chris Warren, the applicant for the retention of the paddle tennis courts. Just to give you some introduction and background. This has been an unprecedented time in my 30 years of running a community sports business. We've had zero income for the best part of 3 months, and all of our staff have been either furloughed or laid off. Starting the business again has been challenging, with many staff members experiencing both physical and mental health issues. My journey in community sport started over 30 years ago, working as a tennis development officer for Hammersmith and Fulham in the 80s. My second stint at Bishops Park started 8 years ago, and the tennis project has now attracted 9,000 registered players, making it one of the most successful public tennis programs in the UK. The paddle tennis facility at Bishops Park is a dream come true. It provides a form of tennis that is inclusive, accessible, sociable and fun. Bishops Park is the only public multi-court paddle tennis facility in the UK. Over 500 people have been introduced to paddle tennis at Bishops Park over 12 months. Our aim is to emulate our success in tennis, whereby our teaching has led to All Saints Primary School, being the first ever state school to become London schools tennis champions. Teenagers who have never touched a tennis racket are playing. Bridge Academy that caters for children who have educational challenges are playing regularly. All state school pupils can use the facility free of charge. Even local builders who have never seen a tennis racket or played on the tennis courts are playing every Wednesday evening. And Bishops Park became the inaugural UK Paddle Tennis Club champions last year, beating all the private clubs. These achievements are something that we can be proud of and shout from the rooftops that Hammersmith and Fulham is once again a leader in sports development, just like we were in the 80s when we introduced tennis for wheelchair users, which is now played at Wimbledon. What stopped us in the 80s was the withdrawal of funding for the programme. Paddle tennis facility comes at no cost to the council and a massive benefit to the physical and mental health and well-being of the local community, and is providing 3 full-time jobs at a very difficult time for the job market. The problems that I have with the committee report: the officer's report cites policies in the reasons for refusal that are not engaged by the application. Light pollution, when there is no application for lighting. I've made repeated attempts to engage with the case officer, sending 7 emails with additional information, clarification and precedents, with no reply. There has been no attempt by the officer to discuss possible mitigation despite what has been offered, something that was afforded to the Hurlingham Club, who have received planning permission in the past 14 days for paddle courts with conditions attached relating to impact of noise. At Bishops Park, acoustic consultants who are experienced with similar projects were commissioned, and a noise impact assessment was submitted in March this year, which found an increase of 0.9 decibels during play, which the experts attributed largely to other background factors in this mixed urban residential sporting park environment. The background factors included traffic noise. Fulham Palace Road is very close, aeroplanes, helicopters and other visitors to the park. Therefore, the noise impact assessment findings concluded that there was no negative impact in the surrounding area. The report...
Mr. Warren, sorry to interrupt you, that's your time. Can you wrap up for me, please? Can you just...
Okay, yeah. The report overstates the heritage impacts with no objection from Historic England. The report states that the courts are located...
Sorry, Mr. Warren, can you just finish up your...
Only one court is located. I believe that Rosie can't get through at the moment onto the...
Yeah, Chris, I'm fine now.
All right, okay, I'll just do the conclusion. In conclusion, there's overwhelming community support, 10 from Bishops Mansions. And so what we suggest to the members is that there's a that we have an agreement whereby there's a further noise impact assessment, removal of the manufacturer's logo, changing the black mesh, and limiting the hours of operation.
Mr. Warren, thank you very much. If I can hand over to
John Lennon, give Paddle a chance. Thank you very much.
If I can hand over to Ms. Hutchins now. Ms. Hutchins, you have 1 minute and 45 seconds in which to address committee. If you'd like to go ahead.
Just to say before I start the timer, that's I can't get my camera working, so I'm just going to have to speak. Can you hear me clearly?
We can. Please go ahead.
Okay, brilliant. So I wanted to address the panel to represent the views of families and friends and lots of people that play paddle tennis, because I thought it's important to hear firsthand about the benefits of this paddle initiative. I was introduced to the game of paddle by a member of the Hurlingham Club and immediately saw the benefits of playing. I and lots of others actively encouraged the team. So it was members suggesting to put the paddle courts in, not Bishop's Park doing it. We actually, sort of wanted the paddle courts because it's such a great game. The courts have been a massive success and attracted people from all sectors of the local community, and anybody coming along to watch it would see that. As regular tennis players, my friends and I could see the immediate appeal of a sport that requires less skill and fitness, yet it offers much more participation. It's easy to play and it appeals to people of all ages and all walks of life. Paddle tennis is actually the fastest growing sport in the world by participation, and there is a clear reason why this is, because it's accessible to such a broad range of people. People well into older age are able to play paddle tennis with significant health benefits. The team at Bishop's Parks are passionate about both paddle and tennis, and they have a fantastic group of coaches, and everybody is warm and welcoming. We've all been desperate to play after lockdown, as we have missed the participation and the exercise. Paddle tennis has been traditionally only available in more privileged clubs and inaccessible to the broader community. The fact that paddle tennis is now available to use for us as a community without the need to join an expensive and exclusive club is a huge positive for the borough. Without it, hundreds of players would lose the opportunities to play. I'm a passionate believer in making sport and sporting facilities accessible to all, not only for the physical health benefits,
Ms.
but
Hutchins,
also...
that's your time. Can I ask you just
Okay,
to
I'm
wrap
just
up?
going to give my quick summary. It's 1 second. Hammersmith and Fulham should be very proud to be one of the first councils nationally to offer paddle tennis to the whole community. We all love the game, and it would be such a shame to have to travel to another part of London to play when we have such an amazing facility on our doorstep. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, if I can now, can I suggest you mute your microphone, Ms. Hutchins?
Yes.
Thank you very much. I'll now move on to members' comments and questions. Councillor Uberoy, I believe you've been trying to get my attention, so please go ahead.
Sure, thank you very much, Chair. I think I only have one question, and it's a very brief one. Has the applicant explained why they didn't apply for planning permission at outset? Was this simply an oversight? Please could that be explained to committee so we can understand the full background regarding this?
Hello, Chair. Can I answer that?
No. Mr. Warren, you can't answer that. Councillor Uberoy is asking an officer to answer that question for him.
Hello, through the chair. Obviously, from the presentation, you'll be aware that there is a separate process that's being carried out by another department in the council with its hat on as landowner, and then through that process, it was granted a lease. And that lease, I gather, was subject to the applicant obtaining planning permission. That planning permission wasn't, or application for planning permission wasn't submitted to officers before the use commenced. So we received a retrospective application after the use had commenced. So hence that's what the position we're in now. Normally when you're dealing with a proposal, as it were, you look at all sorts of different things to sort of mitigate beforehand. But in this case, there have been significant complaints, which in a way demonstrate, that there is some harm which needs to be taken into account in assessing this application. So yeah, thank you.
I could just add through the chair that the use came to our notice back in April last year, following complaints from local residents. We then investigated it, our plan enforcement team, and the investigations and contact with the applicant, as I understand it, then generated the retrospective plan application.
Roy and Matt, thank you for outlining that. I'm quite frustrated members have been put in this position this evening. It's very clear there are benefits to this sport, but at the same time, there is a legitimate process that should be followed in order for consent to be granted. And I'm sure, although I don't know for certain actually, so I shouldn't say for sure, I suspect the other application for the other site in Fulham that's been granted went through the due process and it wasn't retrospective. I entirely understand why residents are frustrated. There is a process, and that process is meant to gain their input so that a weighed decision can be arrived at. And quite frankly, it wastes a hell of a lot of time, money and energy doing it retrospectively, and that's quite irritating. Sometimes we see it at committee. Usually it's a resident that's perhaps done something domestically in their home and they didn't realise permission was granted. But to be full and frank, I would expect a higher level of awareness from a professional applicant that's running a business on our land. I've had a quick look online, and it does say very clearly on the LTA website that planning consent is required for all paddle courts. That's on their introductory PDF document. Although what I don't know is when that was published. That may have only been published in the last few weeks and months, so I don't know that. But it would seem common sense that something like this would require planning permission, and I take a pretty dim view that it wasn't sought in the appropriate way and that we're now in this position. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Councillor O'Roy. Are there any other comments or questions on this application?
Chair.
Councillor Carmel.
Thank you. Almost echoing Councillor O'Roy, I find myself deeply conflicted by this application. Members of long standing on this committee will know that I have a particular dislike of retrospective applications, particularly when it is clear that the applicant should have known and ought to have known that planning permission or limited building consent was required. This is a site I know incredibly well in that my daughters both attend All Saints, and prior to lockdown and the 11 months that the paddle courts were built, I passed very frequently, and I do accept that paddle tennis creates more noise than real tennis matches. However, to counterbalance the screams of excitement that were mentioned, I think were slightly overstated, because I've heard some very great screaming from the tennis courts at Bishop's Park, and to hear my daughter's class when they're having their tennis lesson, you probably need earplugs, for which I'm very grateful to Bishop's Park Tennis for providing the free facilities. I'm worried that officers do not appear to have constructively engaged with Mr. Warren to try and find some solutions. I mean, for instance, the grounds for refusal about advertising. I mean, we could quite clearly impose a planning condition banning advertising, and I've proposed amendments to that on schemes in the past. The visual amenity, I mean, the screens are in the most part transparent. We can put conditions on to control that. We could even condition the hours of use of the paddle courts that are less than the extant permissions for the floodlights. We can condition the hours of use. We can put in conditions on the noise, and we could even, if we wanted to, do a temporary permission subject to there being a second noise report. I don't like retrospective applications, especially by applicants who should know better. I would be very interested in the rest of this discussion, because I'm not entirely certain which way I'm going to go, but I will bear in mind that there are thousands of our citizens who need to lose their corona stone. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carmel. Are there any other comments or questions on this application?
Yeah, Chair, if I may.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Just on the noise assessment, starting on that, reference was made by the first speaker on this that they had some concerns about whether or not this was truly reflective as to the operations of the full capacity of paddle tennis. I just wondered what officers' view was in terms of that report. And building on that theme, I note that the applicant did offer to do a second noise assessment, and I wondered whether or not that was a new offer or it was something that had been put forward before. Because I think if officers were of the view, obviously, that the first assessment was inappropriate, having a second one would have been very helpful for members. So if I can put that question first.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Through the chair. Our noise expert did consider there were significant deficiencies with the noise assessment. The one submitted on the first application, that was first retrospective application that was refused, was submitted after we'd already made the decision. So on the second application, when we had the opportunity to look at that assessment, as I said, our noise expert did consider significant deficiencies with the assessment, and it wasn't a fair representation of the noise potential of these paddle courts. I think it's important to inform committee that we didn't engage with the applicant in respect of these deficiencies, largely as we were mindful, as I think it was touched upon by my colleague Roy in his presentation, that given the nature of the use, the likely mitigation required to appropriately address the noise disturbance would effectively necessitate enclosing the paddle courts, or at least providing such a large acoustic screen, which, while it may potentially address the noise concerns, it would obviously accentuate the policy conflict in respect of unacceptable harm to the character and appearance of the conservation area. So, I mean, we were also mindful, I think it's important for committee to be aware that, notwithstanding obviously the impact of COVID that's been mentioned, the paddle courts are in existing use, and therefore there are disturbances happening, as sort of referenced by in the objections that we received, and officers didn't consider it appropriate to delay the decision-making process by engaging in discussions with the applicant, especially when we clearly didn't consider there was any viable solution to the policy conflicts and therefore the unacceptability of the use. And the reference from Councillor Carmel as to the use of conditions to limit the use, we felt in consultation with our noise expert that at any time of the day the potential noise disturbance would be unacceptable.
Thank you for that. Could you just elaborate on what you mean by deficiencies? Is it deficiencies in terms of the methodology? I mean, I take your broader point that you're saying however they operate, you think the noise is excessive, but was it a problem with the report or is it a problem with the sport, really? That's my question.
Philip, would you be able to advise?
Yeah, of course. It wasn't deficiencies with the methodology. It was more to do with the accurately representing the impact. So you've got the character noise, I think one of the residents alluded to, compared to normal tennis. You've also got the duration, the times when the assessment was carried out. You've also got no commentary on the intensity of the game, the number of players that were played at the time. They did mention that the three courts were in use, but as you're probably aware, the noise generation depends on the intensity, which can vary depending on how many people and how actively the game is being played, which I think they were the main considerations, which we did recommend to planning that a further assessment would be carried out. But on further discussion with planning, it was decided that the mitigation would not be acceptable in this circumstance. So we don't have issues that the noise can be mitigated. It's more that any mitigation wouldn't be acceptable on the grounds of amenity, visual amenity.
Okay, thank you for that answer. Is it okay, Chair, if I continue on this? Yeah. Look, I know we're assessing the application in front of us tonight, but I was obviously made aware through the meetings that a similar application has been granted in a private members club, the Hurlingham Club, which is obviously in a conservation area, obviously is surrounded by people enjoying the club. How do officers square, if you will, the same sport, presumably being undertaken in the same way in a similar area, being permitted there, where it was felt that adequate mitigation could be put in place, whereas in this situation it can't? I'm very nervous about granting planning to a private members club where we say we can mitigate it, and where we've got much wider community use, we're saying we can't possibly do it.
Through the chair, just to explain that obviously that application is a different site. There are different site constraints relevant to that proposal. In particular, the applicant or the application has conditions have been attached. So there's a noise impact assessment that's required for that. There's also a temporary 1 year hours condition, which is subject to review, which means that if the operation is causing harm, then the hours would be deemed to be unacceptable. But also there is an existing paddle court at this location, and they're expanding the existing facility, if you like, from 1 to 3. So the residents, if you like, are used to having the paddle courts. There have been no complaints in relation to that existing paddle court. On the basis that there have been no complaints and that this is a temporary permission, officers feel that we can explore a different position if there becomes a problem later on.
But by that same token, noise assessment, temporary permission, note on the limitation of hours, and going from 1 to 3 courts. Surely we could condition this in a way. I'm particularly minded to do a temporary notice to mitigate it. It seems that we're applying 2 different standards here to me.
I think effectively the courts have been operating. So while it's not been regularised, in effect, it's been tested already. And we can see certainly from the level of objections that have been received in the vicinity of the site that there are problems. It has created disturbances. Furthermore, I think the important distinction between this and the Hurlingham application is that there is scope for viable mitigation without treading on other policy areas, where in this particular case, as we sort of mentioned earlier, we simply don't see any viable solution to mitigating the noise impact while also meeting the policy requirements around preserving or enhancing the character and appearance of the conservation area.
Sorry, Matt, can I just, and Chair, can I just follow up on Matt's point there? And I should declare that I have not now, nor do I have any particular desire ever to play paddle, but the Hurlingham application was subject to various planning conditions to mitigate any possible impact on local residents. Well, I think the point that Councillor Thorley is making is that you are assessing the Bishop's Park, which is a public facility to which our residents can participate in, that has been, quite frankly, wrongly operating without the benefit of planning permission. But whilst it has been operating without the benefit of planning permission, it has also been operating without the constraints of any planning conditions. And quite frankly, I think Councillor Thorley has persuaded me that were we to grant a temporary permission for this with various planning constraints, probably akin to those that were imposed on the Hurlingham Club, we could then properly assess this application. I am worried that this is a facility that is available to the general public, that in a time when we are the government and the council are desperately trying to encourage people from being couch potatoes into getting back some of the fitness that was achieved pre-lockdown, or even improving existing fitness, that we are ahead of ourselves. Thank you.
Chair, may I very briefly come in?
Councillor Uberoy and then Councillor Ahern. Councillor
Thank
Uberoy,
you,
please
Chair.
go ahead.
With respect to what Councillor Carmel and Councillor Thorley are saying, my interpretation of what we've heard this evening is that the same standard has been applied in terms of tests to both sites. It's just that they happen to be entirely different sites. With this application in front of us this evening, the road is literally on the doorstep of the courts. The impact on neighbouring properties is significant, and that's reflected in the number of objections that have been received. One of the beautiful parts of that part of Fulham is the fact that as you walk down that road, you effectively feel you're at one with those courts, because they effectively fall out and are part of the road and what have you. The Hurlingham site, although I accept I haven't seen that application, I'm not aware of the exact details, but there simply, in my opinion, wouldn't be such residential impact. So I feel it's the same test that's been applied to both, but the sites are different in terms of the residential impact. Hence why the Hurlingham site has not received any resident objections. Thank you.
Mr. Butler or Mr. Sagwa Power, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I can just sort of clarify. I mean, you know, Councillor Carmel and Councillor Thorley are right in respect to, I mean, I can refer to local plan policies. They are certainly supportive, generally speaking, of new and improved recreational and sports facilities. And I think it has been, the importance there has been certainly felt during the COVID, when everyone's been in sort of lockdown. But a very important consideration is that different sports uses can have very different impacts on surrounding residential occupiers in what is a dense borough as Hammersmith and Fulham is. And in relation to this particular use, we consider the nature and the scale of the existing paddle use is unacceptable in such close proximity. It's literally across the road to fairly dense residential properties. They're not single family dwelling houses. We're talking, stacked residential flats. The point I made earlier was that we simply do not consider there are any appropriate mitigation or controls on the time of use of the premises that would make them acceptable in line with policy. As I said, even if we conditioned them so they were only used during the day, when you'd expect ambient surrounding noise levels to be higher than sort of late in the evening, we still consider that there would be significant disturbance to residential occupiers. And I think that's the important point for us in the assessment of this.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Asagba Power, did you want to add anything? I can see that you're sharing your screen.
Yeah, I just wanted to show where the site was in location. If I can just get this screen to move. Yeah, just if you look at the site, in terms of the actual facilities, they're right on the edge of Bishop's Park Road. Obviously, the mansion blocks are directly opposite, and if you look at Bishop's Park as a whole, clearly, if these were situated in a slightly different location, there would be a different impact. And I think it's the proximity to those residential properties, and the fact that there is demonstrable harm. If it was the case that we were dealing with this application prior to it actually being operative, then I think would be willing to sort of give the use a chance, if you were, in terms of exploring whether it could be acceptable. I think because they've been operating for a significant period, notwithstanding the COVID, they've demonstrated that it is causing harm, and we've had, obviously very strong objections from people that live directly opposite. Unlike the other scheme, where we've not had that level of interest from local residents, and also on that scheme, it was an application prior to actually being implemented, which means, presumably, there's a more sympathetic attitude to it, so long as they stick to the rules. But in this case, the applicants haven't done that, and we feel that, as Matt has said already, and I've said in the presentation, that notwithstanding any sort of noise mitigation, there are visual amenity issues which then come into play as well. Thank you.
Ahern, did you have a question on this application?
Points, actually. I'd like to make a comment. I'd make a comment.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, To take that last point by the officer first, you don't have to have a trial run for these paddle courts at this location. It's been running unlawfully for some time, and it has a huge detrimental effect on local people. We know that because they've put complaints in. There's a number of interesting points that this report has brought up in my mind, because I remember at one time you had to live quite close to an application site before you could put in a complaint or could put in a letter of support or objection to a planning permission. That was chucked away by the Tory administration in 2006 for, I think, political reasons. But now you have the bizarre situation today, where on the face of it, you look at the report, and there are far more people in support of this application than there are against. But then if you look at where a lot of the supporters live, I've jotted down a few. They live in Shrewsbury, New Malden, Bishop Stortford. There's even a letter of support from the Officers' Mess, Victoria Barracks in Windsor. Now, all these people might actually come to this site and use it and take a benefit, but they don't live next to it, so they don't have to put up with all the noise created. And we've had a lot of discussion in noise, and most of us been around a long time. And we know when there's noise from an establishment, you make the proprietor put in sound barriers, keep the windows closed, keep the doors closed, all these kind of things. You can't with this because it's basically an open air facility. So unless you actually build a great wall of China in front of it or roof it in some way, then you're not being able to mitigate the noise that quite naturally will occur when people are out there enjoying themselves and playing this game. So I've given a lot of thought to all the views that have been put forward, but the one above others that weighs most on me are the 40 objectors from Bishop Mansions, because they live right next to it. They are actually directly affected by all the noise that has come from this site. So their objections far outweigh any support letters that have been received. And it's not just the noise that causes my concern. When you look at all the fences put up around these courts, it looks like a kind of mini prison camp outside your windows with huge wire walls. Actually breaks down the view into the park. It's a complete impediment of the natural beauty of the park. So I have no hesitation at all in agreeing with the officer's recommendation that this application be turned down.
Sorry, Chair, just on a point of clarification, just a very quick point of clarification on something that Councillor Hearn said. It is completely, utterly untrue that it was the Conservatives who changed the rule about objecting if you don't live close. I remember sitting on a panel with you 15 years ago for something in your ward in White City where they were changing a community hall, and the letters of support came from as far afield as Australia and Kosovo, and you raised no objection. And I call upon you to withdraw your unfounded allegation.
Can I, Chair? I'm sorry about that. The letters that Councillor Carmel referred to also included two people lived in Cairo in Egypt. And because we had the rule, the Labour Council had a rule, you had to live in proximity before your objections or support was accepted. They were ruled out of order. And you've got a lot of time on your hand now, Alex. Go and look at the blinking minutes of the meeting.
Chair, if I may return to the meeting.
Hang on, sorry. No, excuse me both. Can you stop for a moment? Thank you. Can we both just return to the application at hand?
Yes.
This is a conversation that you can both have outside of this meeting. So if we can return to the application at hand. Are there any
well,
other...
if we can have the conversation outside the meeting, can you get Councillor Ahern to withdraw the allegation, please?
No, because it's true.
Can we stop now? I'm not going to
It's
discuss
a patent untruth, a terminological inexactitude.
Chair, you have a mute button. You can use it.
I'm not going to discuss this any
Behave
further.
yourself.
Both of you, please, both of you, put your mute microphones on. Thank you very much.
When he withdraws the untrue allegation.
I fully anticipate Councillor Ahern has no intention of withdrawing his allegation, in which case we need to move on. So
It's
if I can ask...
Chair, not an allegation.
Statement, allegation.
Okay, let's call it what it is. It's a terminological inexactitude.
Can we please move on to the application? So are there any other councillors? Councillor Ahern, please can you mute your microphone? Councillor Ahern, can you mute your microphone? Thank you. Rosie, please can you mute your microphone as well?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just appalled. It's quite appalling to witness this carry on.
Thank you for your comment. If we can move back to this application.
Yes, Chair, if I may, I'm conscious of time and I want to get home like everyone else. I just want to move, if I can find a second, to 3 amendments. I think we've covered this in as much detail as we need to. I am of the view that the public benefits outweigh the harm, but I think in order to do that, you need to condition this. So if I can find a second, I'd like to propose 3 amendments. The first amendment relates to a noise impact assessment. The second relates to temporary use being granted for only 1 year. And the third links to hours of operation, which I would suggest be aligned to the hours of operation for the tennis courts. So noise assessment, permitted use for only 1 year, and limitation on hours of operation, if I can find a seconder.
Do we have a seconder for Councillor Thorley's amendments?
More than happy to second all 3.
Okay, so I'm going to take a vote on all 3 of those when we move to the vote, unless I have any other comments or questions directly on this application.
Chair, can I?
Sorry, Alistair, go ahead.
All right, I just wanted to ask for clarification from Councillor Thorley in relation to the noise impact assessment. Are you asking for a new noise impact assessment to be provided?
Yes, absolutely. So in terms of the wording, I without having the benefit of seeing the condition, I'd expect it to be very similarly worded to the condition attached to the Hurley application, but I would further request that the methodology and remit is agreed in advance with officers so that it is very clear what is being undertaken, so that everyone is, say, absolutely clear about the nature of that assessment.
Thank you for clarifying.
Alistair, if I can ask you just for a point of clarification for my sake, can we take a vote on these amendments prior to voting on recommendation 1?
You have to.
Thank you.
Take a vote on amendment first.
I'm just asking for clarification from the legal officer.
Yes, sorry, I was talking to myself there for a moment. Yes, you
Thank
can.
you.
That's
Thank
fine.
you so much. Go ahead. Okay. Are there any other comments or questions on this application? No. Okay. In which case, then, I will move to a vote, and I will take a vote on Councillor Thorley's 3 proposed amendments first. Now, I am going to have to do all of these separately, so please bear with me. Councillor Thorley's first amendment, which was seconded by Councillor Carmel, regarding a second noise impact statement. I'm going to ask each of you in turn whether you are for or against that recommendation. So if I can begin with Councillor Ahern first, sorry, for or against that amendment. If I can begin with Councillor Ahern first of all.
Against.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Carmel.
For.
Councillor Perez.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Sadiq.
Against.
Councillor Thorley.
Yeah, for.
Councillor Uberoy.
Against.
And I also vote against that amendment. So if I can take Councillor Thorley's second amendment, which was regarding granting temporary use for a limited time of 1 year, if I can ask all of you how you vote on that proposed amendment. So Councillor Ahern.
Against.
Councillor Carmel.
In favour.
Councillor Perez.
Against.
Councillor Sadiq.
Against.
Councillor Thorley.
In favour.
Councillor Uberoy.
Against.
And I also vote against that amendment. So if I can finally go to the amendment regarding the hours of operation and aligning those with the hours that are already in existence for the tennis courts. If I can have each of your votes on that amendment, beginning with Councillor Ahern.
Against.
Councillor Carmel.
For.
Councillor Perez.
Against.
Councillor Sadiq.
Against.
Councillor Thorley.
For.
Councillor Uberoy.
Against.
And I also vote against that amendment. So those are those amendments not agreed. If I can move on now to recommendation 1, which is in the report, but it's actually amended in the addendum. So if you can take a look at your addendum, you can see the amended recommendation there, which reads quite simply that the application be refused for the following reasons. And then the reasons are detailed in the report. So if I can take each of your votes here, and just a reminder that if you're voting for that officer recommendation, then you're voting to refuse the application, and that if you're voting against that officer recommendation, then you're voting to disagree and therefore grant permission. So if I can, so the officer recommendation reads that the application be refused for the following reasons. So Councillor Ahern.
For.
Councillor Carmel.
Against.
Councillor Perez.
For.
Councillor Sadiq.
For.
Councillor Thorley.
Against.
Councillor Uberoy.
My apologies. For.
And I also vote for the officer recommendation, which is that application refused. Thank you all for all of our speakers this evening on that particular item. If I can move straight ahead now on to item number 5, which is Westfield London Shopping Centre. And if I can ask the presenting officer, Mr. Peter Wilson, to please introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. Just give me a second, I'll get this up for you.
Absolutely.
This item is, as you've correctly said, a change of use for a unit at Westfield, known as Unit 0000C, or more commonly known as House of Fraser. And the application is for the subdivision and the change of use of this existing unit, which is over 3 floors, to create 2 separate Class A1 retail units and the remainder to be offices. So the 2 A1 units were around about 1,500 square metres each, and they will be facing internally into Westfield. So there will be a continuation of that internal shopping frontage. And the B1 office is the remaining 6,000 square metres on the upper floors and will be accessed externally from Ariel Way. There are no external changes proposed as part of this application. Facade changes will be coming forward as part of a recently submitted application solely relating to those external changes. For those of you, I'm sure, are familiar with Westfield, the overall arrangement is on the left-hand image. On the right-hand, that shows House of Fraser, which is this triangular anchor unit with each street travelling westward here on the image. Ariel Way is bottom to top. And try and demonstrate the floor plate arrangements. Here we have each street again here, and the access that goes up into the escalators into that part of Westfield. And this is the overall arrangement. This is the new office core with the stair cores and lifts that will be coming off of Aerial Way, which is demonstrated again on the left. The access areas, and this is the office lobby, will be in that corner, that bottom corner. This is the subdivision. Unfortunately, it's in the same colour, but that red line there shows the subdivision on the lower floors, about between office and retail, going back into the store. And then on the upper floor, it's the whole floor plate becomes offices. To try and demonstrate that, this is Aerial Way, and this is that corner of House of Fraser we can see here. So this sharp tapered corner here becomes the new lobby for the offices, and the entrance is in this area here. And then as we go up, which is this part here as well, and then as you go up into here, the upper floors here will become offices, but the internal spaces and arrangements will become retail. Demonstration there of some elevations, so to demonstrate there's no changes to go through. So the internal arrangement, which is currently House of Fraser, who are vacating property, we're in the process of doing so. This will remain a retail frontage to maintain that within the Westfield site, as shown. And there are heads of terms secured here, which amounts to 5% affordable workspace, which is around 300 square metres, 310, with a market discount on the rates. In addition to a commuted contribution of £487,000 there for affordable workspace elsewhere, employment and training and travel plans for new uses. Officers consider that this accords with the development plan and that the offices are an appropriate use within the White City regeneration area, are complementary to the overall Westfield provision, and that the two retail units will maintain the retail function appropriately within the shopping centre itself. And on that basis, a recommendation to the committee is that planning permission is granted. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Wilson. If I can invite now forward Mr. James Hush to speak in support of the application. And I just wanted to start by giving my apologies on behalf of the committee to have kept you waiting for so long to speak in support of this application. You can see we had quite a lot of business this evening, and you know, lots of kind of details to iron out. So hopefully you're still with us. Yep. Are you able to unmute yourself?
Yep, I'm here. I'm muted.
Wonderful. Okay, so you have 3 minutes to address committee. Let me know when you're ready, and I'll let you know when your time is up. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. My name is James Hewish. I represent Montague Evans, the agent for the application. I won't keep you too long, as the presenting officer has already explained the scheme to you in detail. But these proposals represent an opportunity to ensure that a high quality and range of appropriate town centre uses are delivered within a successful Westfield shopping centre. Town centres are currently undergoing a period of dramatic change, and the applicant is proactive in reacting to changes in the market and ensuring the longevity of the centre, the White City regeneration area and Shepherd's Bush town centre. The proposals retain 2 medium-sized retail units and introduce new co-working office space, which will strengthen the economy, provide new employment opportunities, promote small businesses, and encourage new footfall in the area. Other public benefits of the proposals include on-site affordable workspace, the financial contributions to promote local procurement and employment during construction and end use. And the application has not received any objections from consultees or local residents and would overall be in accordance with the development plan policies. In light of the above, we welcome the officer's recommendation for approval and request the committee resolves to grant planning permission this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, are there any members' comments or questions on this application?
Just one, Chair, if I may.
Yeah, absolutely.
I will be voting in support of this. I think it makes a lot of sense. The question I have really is why it's before committee, because I think we're going to have a lot of situations in the immediate future where we're going to have to change use class and so on. Otherwise, we're going to end up with a very dead high street. I'm just wondering why this is before us, because obviously there is a time to get matters before committee, and I hope the council is being as proactive and supportive as it can be for retailers to allow them to change use classes as and when they see fit to adapt to the ever-changing market conditions. So I say my question is really why it's before us this evening, if there's a particular reason.
Yes, Chair, if I may. It comes down to the scheme of delegation, Councillor, because of the size of the floor space that it's being changed and manipulated. It falls to have to go before committee. But I can assure you, officers, as set out in the report, are very supportive of the proposal. We think it's complementary and supports the vitality and viability of Westfield, which is obviously a very important presence within the borough and the north of the borough in particular. And this has been brought to committee as quickly as possible.
Thank you.
Sorry, I needed to unmute myself there. Any other comments or questions on this application from members?
If I may, Chair.
Yeah.
Notwithstanding what Councillor Thorley said, Westfield as a shopping destination in the borough is a vital part of our offer. Mr. Hewish mentioned having two medium-sized retailers. I wonder if officers could give any indication as to A, whom these retailers might be, and B, how their recommendation might be if they come back and say, well, actually, we'd like to turn the entire anchor unit into offices.
If I can actually interrupt for a second, I imagine officers can answer the first part of that question if they know the answer, but they probably can't answer the second part of your question because it's a hypothetical. And that's not what's being considered here. So if officers can take the first part of the question on whether we know who the proposed realtors are in the retail areas that we're retaining.
Just before officers come in, you are of course entirely correct, and I can rephrase the question to bring it into order if you so wish.
Yep, go ahead.
I've got to think about how to rephrase it.
Oh. Okay.
How important is the anchor unit to the retail future of Westfield? And would it invalidate our current policies were the anchor unit to be removed from the Westfield offer?
So do we know who the realtors are, the proposed, in the proposed retail offer that we're retaining? Do we know who's going to be leasing those?
Yes, Joe, the answer to that is that currently, no, we don't. I would imagine my understanding is that Westfield are in negotiations with a number of parties. There are other retail units that are undergoing changes that don't require planning consent. For instance, the Debenhams unit has recently changed into a different number. Obviously, there's been significant changes in the retail sector beyond simply the recent economic situation. I think to try and respond to your second part there, Councillor Carmel, is the White City regeneration area and the sub area that this sits in is obviously supportive of a wide range of uses, including cultural, leisure, offices, various employment uses and retail. The importance of Westfield as a whole is of course recognised, and there's the substantial retail floor area that it offers, not just within the context of the borough, but regionally and indeed probably European wide, given the sheer scale of the shopping centre. I don't think a change. The anchor store itself is the entry point onto East Street when coming from that angle, and in terms of a point of entry, does have an importance. But it's also, I don't think, to sort of delicately phrase it, the range of uses an office would likely meet the policy thresholds, but it would need to be assessed on its own merits with regard to the relationship onto the internal walkways and entry points with Westfield, and what else was going on within Westfield as a whole at that time, whether there was other changes of use as well.
Chair, with your permission, I will be supporting this application, and I'm quite happy to go to the vote now if there are no other comments.
Well, do any other members have any comments or questions?
I do have a question, Chair, please, if possible.
Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Is in relation to the justification and reasons in page 1 to 7. And number 2, local employment and affordable workspace. In terms of local employment, it states the proposal would continue to provide significant employment opportunities. I know this has been also mentioned in the past. I'm just curious to find out, how is that monitored? Do we have information as to how that process and that's implemented, and how do we know that it's generating employment opportunities at local level?
Yes, Chair, if I may. Our Economic Development Department do have a wide range of monitoring data. I'm not an economic development officer. Unfortunately, I'm not able to explain to you in detail about how all those various data sets and monitoring reports come into play, but that their role is to monitor the health and employment status, business status, and so on and so forth of the borough. The applicant has entered within the legal agreement the local procurement, and which in terms of fit out and what have you, which will have employment knock-on effects, and also the contributions towards local jobs within the operational phase, which is estimated at 33 local jobs, with a payment coming to the council, which the council itself will be facilitating the filling of those posts. There's also the affordable workspace that has been secured, of course, which will be subject to various strategies and reviews through the legal agreement. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any other comments or questions on this item from any other members? Okay, in which case I'll now move on to the vote.
Agree.
Again, so actually, I think because of the online nature of this meeting, I think I do still have to do the roll call, and unfortunately, Councillor Carmel. So sorry to disappoint.
You can always ask if anybody is opposed.
I think I'm just going to do the roll call, if that's okay with you.
You're the chair.
I am. It's on page 123, if I can direct everyone's attention there, and the addendum. So you've got Officer Recommendation 1 there, which is that the committee resolve that the Chief Planning Officer be authorised to grant planning permission upon the completion of a satisfactory legal agreement and subject to the conditions listed below. So, Councillor Ahern.
Agreed.
Councillor Harcourt.
Agreed.
Councillor Carmel.
Agreed.
Councillor Perez.
Agreed.
Councillor Sadiq.
Agreed.
Councillor Thorley.
Agreed.
Councillor Uberoy.
Agreed.
And I also agree and vote for the recommendation. So if I can point your attention to recommendation 2, which is again on page 123, which is to authorise that the Chief Planning Officer, after consultation with the head of law and the chair of the Planning and Development Control Committee, be authorised to make any minor changes to the proposed heads of terms of the legal agreement or conditions, which may include the variation or addition or deletion of conditions. Any such changes shall be within their discretion. So Councillor Ahern.
Agreed.
Councillor Harcourt.
Agreed.
Councillor Carmel.
Agreed.
Councillor Perez.
Agreed.
Councillor Sadiq.
Agreed.
Councillor Thorley.
Agreed.
Councillor Uberoy.
Agreed.
And I also vote for the recommendation, which means that application is approved. And we move on to our final item of the evening, which is the item 6, 291 Wandsworth Bridge Road. If I can ask the presenting officer, Mr. Asagba Power, to please introduce the report on this item.
Thank you, Chair. Given the lateness, I'll try and be brief on this one. It's a council-owned application for a freestanding single-sided illuminated LED screen. It's on the Wandsworth Bridge Road. I'll just show you a plan. So Wandsworth Bridge Road here, and going north towards Fulham, going south towards Wandsworth Bridge. And you have Barton House here and Cairns House here, which has this kind of arc. And this area here is a parking area in front of those two buildings, and it would be situated in the car parking area. So this is an aerial shot showing the location of the sites highlighted in red. This is the adjacent conservation area. So the site you can see is outside of the conservation area. This is the site at street level, so that's Barton House, this is Cairns House, and the site location in red in the car parking area. This is just looking southward, and the reason for showing this is because the sign is single-sided, so there would only be display of advert on this side, which is looking southward rather than the reverse. That's just showing where the location of the advert would be on that car park entrance. There would be a landscape base to the advert. The advert's blue. Previously, there was a permission for a advert on this same location in 2017. It's still valid, but the applicants have come back revising the proposal, and you can see from the presentation that the current scheme is smaller than that which was previously approved. This is just giving the context. So Cairns House, so Barton House in the background, and then that's the sign looking southward in blue. And there's just some details showing you the sign, how it would look on the frontage, and the reverse with this irrigated planting. And officer's recommendation is to approve and set out on page 148, subject to the addendum. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Do I have any members' comments or questions on this item? Councillor Uberoy.
Thank you, Chair. This meeting is now entering its 4th hour, so I'll keep this really brief. I won't be supporting this application. It's a simply massive advertisement sign, 10 metres above ground level, 13.5 metres square, illuminating 24 hours a day in an incredibly residential area. We're really trying to enhance residential amenity next to Barton House, and I simply don't think it's fair to have this right next to a building where residents live, a lot of residents live. I do appreciate some of the mitigation that's put in place, for example, the back of the screen being green, the fact that it's on its side and therefore not directly shining into local residents' homes, but it's simply not fair, and I wouldn't want this outside my home, and I don't see why I should therefore approve it to be outside someone else's. I do acknowledge and appreciate the council needs to raise revenue through advertising screens, and it's perhaps something that needs to be maximised more in the future, but I do feel there would be other locations in the borough which lends themselves far better to this. Not a residential site like this. And the second point I'd make to it is that there is a zebra crossing just behind it, and I do appreciate this has been addressed and they've looked into it and they don't feel it would be a distraction, but I do feel there is an increased danger for people crossing at that zebra crossing by approving this application. That's all from me.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Uberoy. Councillor Carmel.
Whilst I appreciate every single point Councillor Uberoy has made, and I have enormous sympathy for them. I wasn't overly in favour of this when it last came to committee back in 2017. The upshot, if Councillor Uberoy wins the vote tonight, is he will end up with a larger screen in the same location. And therefore, even though I wouldn't have approved the first screen, the option before us this evening is we either get this smaller screen or we get a much larger screen. And so therefore, reluctantly, I will be supporting the application.
Thank you, Councillor Carmel. I'm sure Councillor Uberoy appreciates your seasoned advice there. Any other members have comments or questions on this item?
Just one very quick comment, Chair, just conscious of the hour.
Yeah.
I mean, I will be voting in favour primarily because the consented scheme, as I say, is even worse than what's before us tonight. The only thing I note is there are 174 letters sent out to residents. I've had a similar scheme to this in my own ward, which has now been, the planning has been implemented, and I've had a huge amount of correspondence on it. Yeah, Barton Court is, Barton House, is 20 stories high, 4 units a level. Yeah, that's 80 letters there. We have not consulted very widely, so I would just plead with officers when we are doing these applications, they are contentious, that we consult much more widely, because as I say, I think the impact of this, as Councillor Uberoy has eloquently laid out, is significant, and we need to ensure, particularly in this much more challenging time when site notices cannot be put up in the normal manner, we do that. So that's my only comment. I would urge officers to, I know there is a statutory requirement, but I would urge them to consult as widely as they can on this.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other members' comments or questions on this item before we move to a vote? Okay, thank you very much. In which case, I'll direct your attention to recommendation 1, which is in the report there, taking note of the addendum, which reads that the Chief Planning Officer be authorised to grant advertisement consent subject to the conditions below. So Councillor Ahern.
For.
Councillor Harcourt.
Agreed.
Councillor Carmel.
Agreed.
Councillor Perez.
Agreed.
Councillor Sadiq.
For.
Councillor Thorley.
For.
Councillor Uberoy.
Not voting.
And I vote for the application, which is that officer recommendation agreed. Looking at officer recommendation 2 there on page 148, noting the addendum, reads that the Chief Planning Officer, after consultation with the Head of Law and the Chair of the Planning and Development Control Committee, be authorised to make any minor changes to the conditions, which may include the variation, addition or deletion of conditions. Any such changes shall be within their discretion. Councillor Ahern.
We've got 4.
Thank you. Councillor Harcourt.
4.
Councillor Carmel.
4.
Councillor Perez.
4.
Councillor Sadiq.
4.
Councillor Thorley.
4.
Councillor Uberoy.
4.
And I also vote for that recommendation, which is that application approved. Okay, that concludes all of our items this evening. I'd like to thank everyone for attending or watching tonight's meeting. The draft minutes of this meeting will be published on our website very shortly. These will be formally approved at our next meeting, which will be on the 4th of August 2020. If you have any queries concerning any of the applications in the interim, please contact the case officer in the application report. Thank you all very much for your time and have a good evening. Thank you
very much.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you indeed.